Excuse me. We're going to go ahead and call the meeting of the City of Bloomington City Council to order. If everyone will please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance and then a moment of silence. Thank you.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Alderman Massey,
Here.
Alderman Sage, Alderman Malumway,
Here.
Alderman Burgess,
Here.
Alderman Painter,
Here.
Alderman Schmidt,
Here.
Alderman Black,
Here.
Alderman Holman,
Here.
Alderman Bray,
Here.
Mayor Renner.
Here. Thank you very much. I wonder if I could make an announcement. When you're in the movie theater, they have some kind of cool little skit which reminds you to silence your cell phones. I wonder if we could all put our cell phones either on, either turn them off or to put them on vibrate. Thank you very much. That'd be much appreciated. Thanks. Oh, okay. After the roll call. Yeah, okay. All right. At this point, Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
She did.
Oh, you did. Oh, that's right. Okay. This is, that's why it's appropriate. Alderman Sage is ill, and I was informed by Alderwoman Schmidt. At this point, we have recognitions and appointments, and the first recognition, I know she's in the audience, I'm not sure where, but the recognition of the achievements to Nikita Richards, Employment Coordinator, for being selected as the recipient of the Outstanding Women in Communications Award from the Association for Women in Communication in Bloomington Normal. Nikita, where are you? Hey! Who is also an outstanding employee in the city of Bloomington. Thank you. Next, we have the appointment of Julia Kozad Callaghan to the Cultural District Commission. Julia, are you in the audience? Julia, oh, thank you. Thanks for willing to serve. Now, we do have public comment, and just to clarify a couple things, we have 30 minutes from public comment, and I'm not going to start it from this moment. I'll start it from the point that I'm finished speaking, is just to clarify a couple things. If you have very specific issues or concerns, you certainly are welcome to talk in public comment. We don't respond. If you have I do have a mayor's open house, and I'm going to have a special mayor's open house, and by special, unusual one. I always have one on Friday before a Monday city council meeting. The one a week from Friday will be the 50th year remembrance of the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King, and I have a very short video from the National Civil Rights Museum that I'll be showing, and we'll be having it right there in the fishbowl area. So that will be 1 week from Friday, from 4:30 to 5:30. If you also have issues dealing with the city, feel free to come. In that environment, we can often get you immediate answers. Very typically, our interim city manager, Steve Rasmussen, is there, or others, sometimes even Public Works Director Jim Karch or others are there to give you immediate answers and can try to, if possible, solve problems on the spot. In the public comment forum, it is a one-way communication. So it's an opportunity for you to speak publicly to us. And there are up to 3 minutes. I would encourage a couple of things, and that is if you're speaking on the same subject, obviously you can say what you want. I would encourage you to avoid repetition so that we can get to as many people as possible. We have more than the number of people who have requested public comment that we're going to be able to accommodate this evening, but we do have a half hour designated. You have up to 3 minutes a person. We have well over 10 people who have requested public comment. They have been randomly shuffled by our distinguished clerk and given to me. And I teased her, because you spent some time in Nevada or Las Vegas. Don't do it from the bottom of the deck. But anyway, I just wanted to make all of those things clear, that there are many opportunities to engage with myself and the other members of the council on this and any other issues that you might have. Okay. With that, it's not quite 7:05. I'll count at 7:05, and so we have a half an hour. I'm going to read these in groups of 3, so if you could be ready to come forward so that we can get as many people as possible. Again, you have up to 3 minutes, but if you don't use 3 minutes, then there are more people we can hear from. Paul Baker, Scott Steimerling, and Rebecca Houtsma. Okay? So first, Paul Baker.
I fasted during the past 24 hours to give public testimony to my faith.
If I could interrupt you just one second. Is Scott Steimerling in the audience? Scott Sprouse. Because we're having, are we having problems because we can't hear? You just need to, could you pull that a little closer towards you then, sir?
Am I now being heard?
Yeah, and I won't count that against your time. Okay. Go ahead, sir. Thank you.
I fasted during the past 24 hours to give public testimony to my faith. My faith teaches me that there are fewer things more sacred than the bonds of love in a family. I urge the council to pass the Welcoming City Ordinance. It strengthens families and it builds a stronger community for our fair city.
Thank you very much. Scott Steimerling. And then Rebecca Houtsma, and then Lizelle Sarko, I believe. Anyway, go ahead.
Scott Steimerling, Ward 5. I urge the council to not pass the Welcoming City Ordinance. The people that are here in this country legally, fine. The people that are here not legally, I've got a problem with that. If they want to go through the naturalization process, fine. If they crawled under the fence or came some other way, then send them back to their home countries. The streets. I've been on this for a while, and that there are getting to be more and more potholes in this town. And I wonder if, Mayor Renner, I wonder if it was your street, I wonder if you would be on the Public Works Department. I think you would. As you enter Bloomington, it should say, "Welcome to Bloomington, home of the potholes, high taxes." A mayor that has basically violated the public trust. You've taken a leave of absence. Nobody knew where you were, but you sure had your ability to maintain your professor duties at Westland, didn't you? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Rebecca Houtsma, and then Lizelle Sakaro.
Hello. My name is Rebecca Houtsman. I'm a speech-language pathologist and retired clinical supervisor at Illinois State University. My husband, Willie Hunter, is here too. He is a professor and director of the Center for Math, Science, and Technology at ISU. We've lived in this community for 20 years, and we are immigrants. I would like to start by thanking City Council and the Bloomington Normal community and our neighbors here for the wonderful opportunity my husband and I have been given to live, develop our careers, and raise our family in this safe and caring community. We have been able to live the American dream. Our kids are now grown up, and thanks to the foundation they received in this community, they too are living the American dream. My husband and I would like everyone in this community to share our experience. We believe that while we wait for implementation of better immigration legislation, passing a welcoming ordinance is a positive solution for our community that will support immigrant families and help law enforcement to do their jobs more effectively and in greater safety for themselves. I've seen firsthand the good that comes from choosing positive solutions. 75 years ago in occupied Holland, my grandparents made the positive choice, like many other families in the Netherlands, to conceal a teenage girl. Sophie and her friend had been abducted from their village in Poland by a group of occupying soldiers and were forced to accompany those soldiers as they traveled through the occupied territories. The teenagers somehow managed to escape when the contingent arrived in the Netherlands and came into my family's care. My grandparents knew that should Sophie be discovered, they, Sophie, and their 7 children would be sent to death camps. Still, my grandparents chose to protect Sophie. My grandparents were devout Christians, and if you know Dutch people, they were very stubborn. I believe that they were totally convinced that they had God on their side, and therefore they would pull this impossible thing off, and they did.
They successfully concealed Sophie for 2 years until liberation. The fruit of my grandparents' positive choice didn't end there. Sophie chose to stay in a nearby village, became a Dutch citizen, but never married. She dedicated the rest of her life to gathering donated used clothing, blankets, and household goods from the community, which once a year she packed into her car, drove to Russia to distribute to help impoverished families who were suffering terribly under communist rule there. I learned from my grandparents that people are more important than things, and that it is my duty as a human being to offer forgiveness, love, and support to anyone in need who comes within my circle of influence. So tonight, City Council, I am here to ask you tonight to not let immigrants in our community continue to live in fear. Do the right thing. Please pass the ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you. Lisette, Lori Bell, and Michelle Hunt.
Hello everyone, my name is Lisette Zarko and I am an ISU student. I am also a daughter of an immigrant father. I have been given the privilege to be born in the United States, but not many can say the same. Every day under Trump's administration, I have seen on social media families being ripped apart by deportation. And every day I grow fearful for those in my community, my family, and my fellow ISU peers. So when I had been informed that through the FOIA done that Redbird had been targeted by ICE, I became fearful. Because as a first-generation college student, I understand that education is not readily available. And it is a blessing for me to even be here. And to hear that students can't even go to school without fear of deportation is unacceptable. And to hear that the Bloomington Police Department is handing over non-criminal people to ICE is unacceptable. And to hear that this ordinance has been on the table for 1 year with no change is unacceptable. And to have my mom back home in Chicago worry about me driving in Bloomington normal is unacceptable. And the fear of ICE has been instilled in so many Latinx community and has been instilled in Latinx community and immigrant community. It's time for a change. It is time for a change. We need to uplift and protect our immigrant community. So City Council, I ask you tonight to let immigrants in our community, to not let immigrants in our community continue to live in fear. So do the right thing. Pass the Keep Families Together campaign's Welcome City Ordinance.
Thank you. Lori Bell, Michelle Hunt, and Lori Bergner.
Good evening. I also am an immigrant, and I'm very happy to be able to speak to you about my experience this evening. I came to the United States and became an immigrant because I fell in love with an American, and you know what that's like. You know, what are you going to do? However, in our case, because our relationship was not recognized for marriage, and then when we could get married, our marriage was not recognized by the federal government, it took us 22 years. When my wife got her job at ISU, we spent 8 years with her living here. We spent 8 years with our children and our grandchildren being born. 8 years where I had to keep crossing back and forth and back and forth and back and forth over the border. If I hadn't been from Canada, I don't know what we would have done. It took a Supreme Court ruling to bring down the Defense of Marriage Act in order for the federal government to recognize our marriage. And then I spent 2.5 years back in Canada waiting for the process to take place where I couldn't even come back home to Bloomington. I know how long this journey is. I know how arduous this journey is. There are so many people in this room tonight, including our mayor, who made the journey possible for our family to be able to withstand what we had to go through. I want to stand here tonight and tell you, every time I come home and I cross over the border and they look at my green card and he or she says to me, "Welcome home, Lori," I almost burst into tears every time. Every way that you can extend a welcome. We are just a little city. We don't decide the federal immigration. That's not for us to decide. But while we're in this situation, everything we can do to make an immigrant person's life here welcoming. That is our responsibility. And so, City Council, I ask you tonight to not let immigrants in our community continue to live in fear. Do the right thing. Pass the ordinance. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Michelle Hunt, Lori Bergner, and Mike Evans.
Hello, City Council members, Mayor. I come to you tonight from a place of privilege, and that privilege is that if I didn't want to be here, no one would think twice. I come from a privileged background. I had a solid upbringing here in Bloomington, and I'm not, the color of my skin, my background, all of these things mean that if I didn't want to be here, no one would think about it. But I am the daughter of an immigrant, and so I need to be here. Last time I was up here, I expressed my confidence that together we'd pass a welcoming city ordinance and make this a welcoming community. But since then, we've gone in the wrong direction. I'll keep it short. I'm tired, I'm hungry, and I would like to see us pass an ordinance similar to the compromise ordinance that was introduced by the Keep Families Together campaign. I know that there was another ordinance on the table. I know that there were concerns expressed about its similarity to the Trust Act that's already been put in place, but we have another ordinance to consider, and so I humbly ask you to please talk about it, put it on your agenda, put it up for a vote. City Council, I ask you tonight to not let immigrants in our community continue to live in fear. Do the right thing. Pass the ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you. Lori Bergner, Mike Evans. Actually, I have two from Lori Bergner. And then Bruce Meeks.
I've got a couple of concerns. My grandchildren are Hispanic. They're beautiful kids. I wouldn't trade them for anything. I wouldn't change anything. But I remember back when they built the Coliseum over here, how many of you people were here then? My concern is I'll support this ordinance 100% if it's put on a ballot and voted for by the general public, not a handful of people. This doesn't seem like a handful, but compared to the population of the town and the legal voters, I would say I'll support it 100% if that's the case. I just don't want to see it passed by a few and the rest of the people be disappointed in it like they were in the arena. We got stuck with a $25 million bill that wasn't favored by the general public. This one, they changed the council then. They changed the mayor. At least if we do it again because of a vote that one way or the other, a vote that the general public doesn't approve of, then at least we're not going to have a $25 million bill on it. Thank you.
Thank you. Again, Lori Bergner, Bruce Meeks, and Gary Lambert.
Good evening. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak. My name is Lori Bergner, and I'm speaking on behalf of the League of Women Voters of McLean County in support of the Welcoming City Ordinance. As you probably know, the League is a nonpartisan organization, which means we don't support parties, and we do not believe this is a partisan issue, but we do take political stands on things. And I think of them as stands that are for good governance, what we consider good governance. And in this case, good governance means local communities will do what they need to do when the federal government is not doing what it needs to do to fix our very, very broken immigration system. In order to take a position in support of this ordinance, our local league draws upon positions from both the League of Women Voters of Illinois and the League of Women Voters of the United States. So let me read again. I think we've done this before, but I'll do it again from their position. The League of Women Voters is opposed to deportation of non-criminal undocumented immigrants. Undocumented is not criminal. The League supports cities, towns, counties, and states that make a decision not to cooperate with federal deportation and enforcement actions that include non-criminal undocumented immigrants. Furthermore, the League states that all persons should receive fair treatment under the law, and it's critical for the U.S. to encourage immigrant participation in our democracy. We believe that our immigrants strengthen our society and our communities. Adoption of the Welcoming City Ordinance would show respect and caring for immigrant families and a commitment to safety during a time of uncertainty. It would benefit not only immigrant families, but our entire community, of which they are a part. I believe this ordinance does nothing more than what we already would hope that our police would do: not ask for immigrant status, not give information to ICE in any way, or cooperate with ICE in any way. And I think we all know clearly that ICE is deporting many non-criminal immigrants, people that have absolutely no danger and in fact are good for our communities. We urge you to come back to the negotiating table and reconsider the Welcoming City Ordinance. Many communities have passed such an ordinance, and they've had no problem with its implementation. We should be among them. Please place the Welcoming City Ordinance on the agenda for a future meeting of the City Council and take action in support of this ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bruce Meeks, Gary Lambert, and Richard Greenfield.
Good evening, Council. I had prepared about 250 words, but I scrapped them. I talked to some citizens today, and we are offering a $1,000 reward for audio and video related to the meeting that occurred, the conference that occurred at ISU, specifically to the item that came up between the council and another elected official. Again, only for the audio visual, $1,000 reward. This is not for the eyewitness accounts. The same $1,000 reward also applies to any evidence of bullying to Max Renner. You have been taken down a road with no evidence on the first rebuke. It's unfortunate it has come to this, but we have to be fair, due diligence, and follow a due process. We owe that to the citizens and to you, the council, like me, have been vilely put down. There are more emails that you have not seen that have gone on since 2013. As regards to something that's not on the agenda tonight, the welcoming ordinance, I stated to all of you over the weekend, that should go on the ballot. That's not a statement of pro. That's not a statement of con. That's a statement of local democracy. I applaud the police department for their effort related to the training system that's on the agenda to be approved, and for the 3D scanner, which I have used in my professional life. I mentioned to Mr. Matthey this evening before the meeting, I have some concerns about the block grant and the Illinois Department of Natural Resources Agreement related to demolition of historic buildings. An example of that would be the front and center building. If we happen, hypothetically, to condemn that, would we be then subject to the City Council not being able to condemn it and tear it down because the commission, the Historical Commission says, no, you can't do that. So I see that as a problematic situation. Unfortunately, with the welcoming ordinance, discussion's been going on for a long time, which I believe is driven more to make us a pawn in the Democratic Party so they can say, hey, we got another city, sanctuary city. That has nothing to do with my opinion of keeping families together. It has everything to do with it. This body is supposed to be nonpartisan. It hasn't been nonpartisan since the gerrymandering of our wards that's been going on since the 70s. which some of you sitting here have agreed with me on. Thank you.
Let's see. Thank you. Gary Lambert, Richard Greenfield, and Mike Matika.
I'm not going to speak about sanctuary cities. At the last meeting, Alderman Howman brought up the issue of the purchase of the Frontier parking lot, and she expressed concern about the way that was sold. At least she was told that that money was available. If available means that, yeah, we've got money in the cash reserves that we can spend for whatever we decide, and then we can go out and borrow an equal amount of money to replenish that cash reserves, maybe that's what they should have been told. Diane referred to it as misleading. I would call it deceptive, and perhaps even that is overly generous. When you get these items coming up before you, please investigate them where the money's coming from. A similar amount to that was given to the zoo a little later in the year. Would the council have approved that had they known that they were going to have to borrow that money for the parking lot? Same question applies to the additional people for the DBA that were added to the staff. Do your homework. Similar topic tonight. We got the Habitat for Humanity. It's a nice organization. Quite often we hear that we're going to be giving tax rebates with the quote, quote, but for these rebates, the project would not happen. That's not the case here. They're going to build the building. In effect, what we're doing is giving them $135,000. I've got no quarrel with that. That's your decision to make. But why are you putting yourself through this rigmarole and phony baloney of writing an ordinance of deferring complete sales taxes? If you want to give them $135,000, give it to them. Take it out of cash reserves and then borrow it again. I don't care. But you're putting all this extra work on yourselves for no apparent reason. One thing I did notice in the application, it called for $130,000. When I read the final one, it mentioned $134,000. The application said not to exceed a period of 7 years. I see that's not in the ordinance. I question why. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Richard Greenfield, Mike Matika, and Molly Ward. That's about it.
Good evening. My name is Richard Greenfield, and I'm here as a concerned citizen of the city of Bloomington. Before I start, I want to start off with a verse from 1 John chapter 4, verses 7. And it states, "Beloved, let us love one another because love is from God. We love because God first loves us." I want to start off with this because as a Redbird alum, it's been very troubling to me that we've had a few Redbirds that's faced deportation. And I'm speaking today as a person who wasn't always for immigration rights. But as a Christian man, we have to do what's right, and we have to show love. And by passing this ordinance, we're doing the right thing. Now, I know there's arguments saying that we have the Illinois Trust Act. Well, the Illinois Trust Act, when it was passed last Memorial Day in the Illinois House of Representatives, and even the chief House sponsor of the bill would say the language in the Illinois Trust Act is vague, and it's vague to only get the 60 votes needed to pass out the House and to get the governor's signature on that bill. Matter of fact, the chief sponsor of the bill says cities need to go further than what the Illinois Trust Act entails. And we talk about let's wait for the town of normal. We can't wait for the town of normal. Let's upstand them. Let's do something right. Let's show love, as in the first chapter of John, 1 John chapter 4, because God loves all of us. He loves both the citizens and he loves the immigrants. So therefore, city council members, I ask you tonight to not let immigrants in our community continue to live in fear. Do the right thing and pass this ordinance.
Thank you. Mike Matika and Molly Ward.
Thank you and good evening. It's very wet outside, so I'm very thankful we have bridges, and I think it's time we had a bridge again. This council came so close with the Welcoming Cities ordinance. The police chief raised some very legitimate concerns, and then the whole process seemed to stop. So I think we need to go back on the bridge again, come together with our immigrant supporters, with our immigrant community, with our police department, and let's start the dialogue again. Let's open the conversation. There have been some hurt feelings along the way. There have been some strong feelings along the way. But this council came very, very close to doing something very appropriate and very right to protect immigrants in our community and to send a very strong message that we are a welcoming community. As not in our town, and I think you heard this from the League of Women Voters, I'd like to formally offer our services to help conciliate, to bring the council together with groups, to open that dialogue again. We've got excellent clergy, we've got facilitators in town who could be those folks to start the discussion. And that's just my request tonight, to have an open heart, open mind. Let's get on the bridge, let's meet in the middle, and let's talk again and move forward to do the right thing. Thank you.
Thank you. Molly Ward.
Good evening. My name is Molly Ward, and I have been a resident of Bloomington for nearly 2 decades. One morning a week or so ago, just about the time classes were starting at the elementary school down the block from our home, my husband heard yelling coming from the porch across the street. Looking out the window, he saw one of our neighbors in the street, deep in an argument with another neighbor. While I'm sad to say it was not a new thing to witness a public altercation involving this particular neighbor, what was new was that on this morning, minutes after school children had been walking by the house, the neighbor was brandishing a large butcher knife in her hand. My husband immediately called the police, who quickly arrived and took the neighbor into custody without anybody getting hurt. I am thankful that my husband did not have to give a moment's thought about doing the right thing beyond the awkwardness that this will cause to our relationship with our neighbor. He didn't have to give it a moment's thought because my husband and I, like all of the other parties in this story, by the way, are lifelong U.S. citizens. And he was assured that calling the police would not open himself or me or our children up to the possibility of being deported because someone got information about us. Unfortunately, as long as we do not have a codified standard in Bloomington like the Welcoming Cities Ordinance, and really I don't care what you call it, it needs to be a codified standard. As long as we don't have that kind of a standard in our city, that assurance of not having to be deported, not having your information shared with people who have no business to have it, is not something that all of the people in our community have. And like it or not,
that has a chilling effect on the ability of people to trust our police department. Not because the police department are bad people, but because the information gets out. It also has a chilling effect on my own sense of safety as a U.S. citizen, as a resident of this community. And it should make you, each one of you, worry for yourself and your children as well, because it makes it harder for the police to do their job if they can't count on the help of the entire community. As a community, we depend on one another to look out for one another, and my husband and I need everyone in our neighborhood, not just the ones with American passports, to be able to trust the police enough to say something when they see something. City Council, I ask you tonight to not let immigrants in our community continue to live in fear. Do the right thing. Pass the ordinance.
Thank you very much. Okay, at this point, we're going to move on to our consent agenda. Are there any items on the consent agenda that any member of the council would like to have removed for separate consideration? Seeing none, is there a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented?
Mayor Renner, I'll make that motion to approve it as presented to us.
Moved by Alderwoman Schmidt. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Alderwoman Howman. Any discussion? Okay, if everyone will please vote on the consent agenda. Sorry, you may need to vote again. Oh, no, that was, it worked. We got it. The motion carries 8-0. There are no nays to announce, Madam Clerk. Thank you so much. We move right along to our public hearing. We have a public hearing on the CDBG. That acronym is Community Development Block Grant Action Plan, in consideration of authorizing submittal of this action plan to the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development as requested by the Community Development Department. So I am going to go ahead and I'm going to call the public hearing to order. Is there anyone in the audience who would like to speak to this particular issue, the CDBG, Community Development Block Grant Action Plan?
Ryan has his hand up.
Ryan, come forward. Thanks, Ryan. Thank you. Yeah, could you sign in, please? Thanks.
Hello, my name is Ryan Herron. I'm a board member of the West Bloomington Revitalization Project and a co-director of the Tool Library, thriving nonprofit just down the street on Washington Street, if you haven't visited us. We are an organization that's dedicated to empowering the community. We bring community members together to address some of the needs in the community. If you've been on the west side, we often have aging homes, and through some of the programs that we've been able to implement, including restoration of homes, the tool lending library, and the launch of the bike co-op, we've been able to do amazing things within this community. And that would not be possible without the Community Block Development Grant Program. We've been a recipient of that program for a number of years that have been able to get us on our feet as we've moved along as an organization, and to a point now where this funding source, we're able to keep finding new ways to come into the community. And so we speak in support of the Community Block Development Grant Program and this action plan, and thank you for further consideration.
Thank you very much. Anyone else? Okay. I'll go ahead and declare the public hearing closed, and we move right along to our our regular agenda. Item 9A, consideration of a resolution approving the submittal of the CDBG action plan to HUD. And I'll go ahead and turn this over to you.
And Mayor, if I may.
You're going to need to step out?
Yes, I serve on the WBRP board, so I'll need to recuse myself from this conversation.
Okay. We'll talk about you while you're gone.
Good.
Okay.
Good evening, Council and Mayor Renner. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss very briefly our 2018 CDBG program outline as it will be presented to HUD in our action plan. With the CDBG money, it's always money in, money out. I have a balanced budget. It's really easy for me to do. I don't envy you at all because I can't spend what I don't have. So this is what we're estimating that we're going to have for revenues this year for this program. At the end of the day, we estimate we'll have about $686,211, with the majority coming from our annual CDBG allocation. This is a number that's based on what we received for fiscal year 18. They have not released our allocations yet, so it could be exactly the same, more or less. So we will make adjustments as needed. We usually get about $30,000 in income plus some interest and things on, so we usually just do $31,001. It makes my budget balance. It's kind of a strange number, but that also varies depending on our deferral program or our loan program. It's a deferred program, so there's no money due back until a house is sold, the owner decides to rent it out, or they would pass away and the family repays the loan. So we don't ever know exactly how much program income we're going to have because it varies. And then we're estimating that we'll have about $150,000 in carry forward. The way that plays out for our spending plan is about $289,000 in our rehabilitation program. This is pretty standard for what we normally budget. We do homeowner loans and grants, and then we also do grants to not-for-profits. And so we're looking at a grant to Mayor's Manor to do some rehab. It's one of our very few permanent supportive housing units. It's the only site-based, project-based unit in the community to my knowledge, so that's very important, and so getting those units up to date is important. We have rehab service delivery costs. The majority of that is going to be for our lead and asbestos testing that we have to do on all of our projects. We've got some money going into administration. I do want to point out something new in here, and that we've put funding in to help cover a portion of a cost for a planner at the McLean County Regional Planning Commission. This person would be helping us to implement the regional housing study, the outcomes for I'm drawing a blank. What am I looking for? The programs that were identified that we need based on that housing study, and then also helping us with a fair housing assessment that we're required to do by HUD, as well as getting us ready to submit our next consolidated plan. And again, that's just a portion of what the cost would be. We've got the demolition program, which is pretty standard funding. Public services are very similar. Looking at a small sidewalk project at Marie Liddy Park through the Parks program, HVAC system at WBRP, and then a fairly large portion of the money will go towards a sewer project of some sort on the west side. We're still looking at where the best way to spend that money is going to be, and those contracts don't go out yet. So we're waiting to identify the best place for the use of that funding. And then money going to the facade program for WBRP and for use at their tool library. What we have out here right now is kind of a contingent action plan, in that you see there's 3 line items there that have asterisks next to them, and if our funding would be significantly higher or significantly lower, we will make adjustments in those line items. Because we are going into the 4th year of the 5-year action or consolidated plan, I wanted to give you kind of an overview of where we are. It's a little bit difficult. The yellow lines here were spending that we've done this year as of the middle of March. You'll see, like in the rehab program, we're really low in that right now. It will increase some. We have several projects that we're getting ready to wrap up by the end of the year, so that'll increase. But that is a little bit lower this year because we have had about $236,000 from IDA to do rehab as well. So some of our rehab projects were paid for with another source. Then the only other things really I want to point out on this Same thing with our demolitions. Our demolitions are really low this year for a couple of reasons. We also have a grant from another source where we're going to where we're able to pay for demolitions, and then we're having a really hard time getting all the processes through on those. So we have several projects that are just being held up. So hopefully maybe we'll get those done before the end of the year, but if not, that money will roll over and we'll use it for the upcoming year. So are there any questions regarding the plan for this year?
Excuse me, questions by the council? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Not a question. I was going to make a motion.
Gladly.
But first, I thank you so much for your good stewardship of the funds. You really help explain them and take good care of them.
Thanks.
I would like to make a motion to approve the resolution for the fiscal year 19 CDBG action plan.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Second by a couple people, Alderwoman Bray. Any further discussion? At this point, would you please go ahead and vote on this action plan? The motion passes, carries 9-0. There are no nays to announce, Madam Clerk, and I guess we can allow Alderman Black back in. Okay, and we move right along to item C, and that's consideration of resolution, item B, I apologize. And this is the Habitat for Humanity McLean County ordinance. And I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, Council. Before you tonight is an opportunity for the city to partner with Habitat for Humanity of McLean County in their Restore Renewal Project. Staff from Habitat met with staff from the city many months ago during the early phases of this project where they will be significantly renovating and expanding their Restore on West Washington Street on the west side of the city. This project is over a $900,000 investment and will significantly beautify what was at one time Funk Seeds owned property and will result in over 20,000 square feet of retail space under roof. Habitat, of course, does a significant amount of investment throughout our community and specifically on the west side, building new homes for families in need and also restoring existing homes through their Brush with Kindness program. During early discussions with Habitat, we discussed staff and directors of Habitat as to how the city could potentially assist them with their project should they find that there are certain elements of their project they would not be able to afford but for city assistance, because through the expansion of their store they will of course be selling more merchandise, which will benefit the city through an increase in sales tax revenue. One of the projects that Habitat staff wanted to pursue but was not able to is the installation of a solar panel array on the roof of the Restore, and the goal of installing the solar panels would be to reduce the overhead costs of Habitat's operations. The more that Habitat can reduce its overhead costs, the more that it can keep those savings and reinvest those into the community through, as I discussed earlier, building of new homes for families in need and also helping to repair existing homes in the community. Just like to point out how this proposed incentive, which is a rebate of the sales taxes that Habitat would generate at the store for up to, well actually for what is projected to be a period of 5 to 6 years. It would be a rebate of $135,000 to cover what is essentially the cost of the project. Looking at the city's economic development incentive guidelines, one of the guidelines is for staff and for the council to look at the strategic use of incentives, that economic incentives considered by the city of Bloomington will additionally factor in the economic impact of an incentive that a specific applicant has to revitalize a particular area of the city beyond just the applicant's property. So here we have an opportunity to partner with Habitat where they're making a major investment to beautify their property, but yet the whole point of their organization is to make investment and beautify the entire city for benefit of residents who need good quality homes. And then, of course, the more investment that Habitat makes in our community, the more that the city and also the other overlapping taxing districts benefit as well, because the homes that Habitat builds are owned by individual families that pay property tax. So that comes back to benefit the city and other taxing districts for many years to come. Be happy to answer any questions about the proposed incentive agreement. We also have former Executive Director Stan Geeson in the audience from Habitat, and also new Executive Director Jim Walters is with us as well, if you have any questions of a super technical nature for them.
Okay. Questions about this project? Alderwoman Bray.
Are there any other contributors to the rebuild of the restoration of this building?
I believe that Habitat has sought other donations from outside the community and reinvested their own saved funds into the project for the Restore expansion.
Do we know if any other governmental bodies have contributed money to this reconstruction or this project?
I don't know that particularly.
Actually, if you'd come forward for the record. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Stan Geeson. No, there were no other funds from government bodies. Small amount of public donations, but the lion's share is really from a mortgage that we worked with First Financial Bank on.
Okay. Thank you. You might want to stick around in case there are other questions.
So I have another
go ahead,
question.
Please.
So the scope of your restorations, I've volunteered in your fabulous organization, and thank you for all you do and for all the organization does for our community. So in my personal time, I volunteer, and I'm sure folks here probably give money in their personal time, but here today we're talking about city funds and picking one charity over the other or the like. But talk to me a little bit about your scope of your restoration. So for this Habitat store and for the Habitat for Humanity operation we're talking about, are you rebuilding only in Bloomington, or are you rebuilding in other areas here in McLean County? And could you just kind of give me a little flavor of your scope of your operation?
Okay. So the money that is net income from the Restore operation goes into Habitat McLean County affiliate. That money is used primarily in our home building program. We build homes for families with 60% or lower median income level. Families are all approved, and there are other criteria involved. One key one is sweat equity that's required of families, and the money would be used in that program, but we've not discussed that it needs to be restricted to Bloomington Normal. The program serves the county. Realistically, I would tell you that we have just completed the second home in Leroy, and those are the first two homes that have been built outside of Bloomington Normal in 20 years. So primarily it serves Bloomington and Normal, and of that, the lion's share goes to Bloomington's community. If that's helpful.
Do you have one more question? Do you have any pending requests with any other groups or any other communities that you assist to give money towards your project? You said you're not getting any money from any other groups, but have you sent out any pending
Do you mean,
requests?
do we have any other governmental agencies? Or
No.
the only money we're seeking, by the way, the money from the mortgage paid for the building reconstruction, tearing down all of the site development. The only money we're seeking is for the solar project, and that will go on the new building. We have no other requests to other bodies for those funds.
Thank you.
Okay.
Any other questions? Alderman Milliwamp? Oh.
He was first.
Okay. Alderman Massey.
So this is probably a question more for Austin. We're not asking for a rebate of net new sales above and beyond where Restore has been for years of operation, where it's a rebate of 100% of the sales tax. or at least 100% of what we would get, the 3.5%.
That's correct. It's a rebate that's sourced from basically $1 of sales tax effective the beginning of this coming month would be set aside and then allocated and rebated to Habitat up until the $135,000 is repaid. In looking at projections of if you were to say, well, let's just rebate the new incremental amount, the payback period would be significantly longer. In the end, the city nets basically the same. The city just gives up what that current existing revenue stream would be for basically what amounts to a shorter time period as opposed to giving up the new incremental that would amount. And I guess to follow up on Alderman Bray's question, because the restore is located in the city of Bloomington, it is the city that is the most beneficial, the largest beneficiary of sales tax that is generated on the sale of general merchandise from the resource operations. The state of Illinois also benefits their 5% of the 8.75%, and then McLean County receives a 0.25% from the sale of general merchandise, not including the 0.25% from our home rule that goes to the mental health. So it would be, as is structured, the city's 3.5% less the 0.25% of our home rule that we give to the county for the mental health agreement. So.
Okay. The other part, and I shot a question out on this earlier, is I was reading through the proposal, and solar arrays in Illinois generate renewable energy credits, and the proposal includes an estimate for the amount of renewable energy credits that would be generated and the sale of those as revenue coming back in to offset the costs of the solar array. So, according to what we have in the packet, the actual estimated cost of the solar array after the sale of those credits is actually only $76,000. I'm very leery of supporting this to start with because there are precedents that this could set. It doesn't seem to me that it necessarily fits in our economic incentive packages that we have in place. But if we were to modify this agreement so that whatever credits were generated and the revenue sold also counted towards the payback of the $135,000, I think I could live with that. Versus right now, it seems like we're, as Gary said earlier, we're literally just giving $135,000, and they're actually going to generate another $60,000 on top of that back. So that doesn't seem equitable to the citizens of Bloomington if that money doesn't actually count towards the payback period. Does that make sense at all to what I'm saying?
Right, and looking at some of the new changes as a result of the FEJA legislation that was approved in Springfield to promote solar, and of course we've been seeing in the news a lot of new solar array projects, much larger, are being proposed out in the county and across Illinois. From what I was reading on the renewable energy credits, that's going to be a tiered system in value on kind of a first-come, first-served basis. So the projects that are able to get in on those early will get a bigger credit, and the ones that come in later will get a smaller credit, or maybe none at all if all of the credits are used up. So the amount of credit that is shown in the estimate as a projection is basically a projection. So it's, I think, difficult to say that that's a guarantee. And the way that I would look at it is if that's additional funds, like a grant, basically Habitat is able to leverage, more power to them, because that's going to help, again, lower their overhead costs, which will then result in more investment in our community. So
I understand that part where you're coming from on that, and I get that, but we're looking at, we've been fighting for 4 months to balance this budget. We're going to fight for 10 months to balance the next budget. And I think that if we could put some wording in that just said, whatever the value of those credits might turn out to be, that went to offset the total cost of the project, that would make this a lot easier for me. Because without that, I've swung plenty of hammers for Habitat too, but without some sort of phrasing like that where those credits also go against the balance of the project, I can't vote for this. So.
At this point, we are so far over time. Can I have a motion to suspend the rules to give us another 15 minutes?
So moved.
Moved by Alderwoman Howman. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Alderman Milawambwe. If you'd go ahead and vote. This is just, again, to extend the debate, because, as I say, we're way over time. Why isn't that showing? There we go. It's 8-0. There are no nays to announce, Madam Clerk, and so we'll have another 15 minutes of discussion. And you were finished? Alderman Milawambwe, Burgess, and Howman.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. I think I'm kind of leaning towards what Jamie is saying, in that I'm a little ambivalent about the proposal. Because for one thing, what I'm worried about is given our current budget context, I'm worried about the message that we're sending. We've made some decisions in terms of raising fees in some areas. We've made some cutbacks in terms of not only staff but also services. But yet, at this moment, we're saying, well, sure, but we'll give you, this extra money. And I'm very supportive of what Habitat does. I think it's it's incredible. I mean, it's a laudable goal. But that's what I'm struggling with at the moment. So with that said in mind, I do have some questions, and if you will just indulge me for a few minutes. So how long has Habitat been in operation in Bloomington or in the area?
We've been in operation since 1985.
1985.
33 years.
Okay.
They're at the Restore facility since I think 2008.
Okay.
It's in the proposal.
2008, 2009,
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And how many homes does Habitat build in Bloomington per year, would you say?
Typically 5 or 6.
5 or 6.
We've been at a capacity of about 6. We anticipate with the increased income from the Restore, we'll be able to increase that number.
Okay. And have you ever requested money from Bloomington before?
Not in this context. We are beneficiaries of money managed under Jennifer's.
Okay.
And some of the money from CDBG has helped us with, often it's a lot that the city it's an infill lot. The city would like to have a house gone that's currently there, and we come in and build a new home.
Okay. And
so to clarify,
the
city has provided property to Habitat for Habitat to build a home on to improve.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
You said a lot. I just wanted
a
lot of property.
Yeah, very good.
So.
Good catch.
Right.
I meant lots, as in land lots.
Parcel of real estate.
Parcel.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Right. That's good. You're a funny guy. So would it be fair to say that the properties that you work on would increase in terms of value, right? So, and if they do, then the city would get an increase in property taxes, right?
Yes, I mean that's clearly the dots that I was connecting in early conversations with Habitat and throughout, and then in terms of getting the go-ahead from former city manager Hales to negotiate an agreement with Habitat and trying to determine what would be the best way to structure that, knowing who we're working with as the developer across the table, an entity that has provided so much to the city and provides a tremendous amount of positive benefit and so closely aligns with the goals of our comprehensive plan to promote infill development, to increase the availability of affordable housing. Those were the thought processes staff was going through to help with the request from Habitat for assistance for this project that will reduce their overhead costs to allow them to invest more.
So since 1986, we've pretty much benefited from that sort of increase in property taxes.
Right. Every year that a vacant parcel of property is significantly improved or a property that was, nearing its end of useful life, a blighted, home that for some reason the city had to acquire and demolish, is then, reinvested in by Habitat with a new home that generates better, higher values of higher assessed value, which leads to increased property tax for all the taxing districts, not just the city.
And then last question, if you don't know the answer, that's okay, but how, on any given property, so how much would you estimate the increase would be in property tax revenue?
I think in the Illinois Wesleyan University study that was done a couple of years ago, there was an estimate of $1,900 in property tax per home. And again, that's looking at the
increase or the entire
property tax bill, so for the benefit of all taxing districts.
But per property?
Per property, right.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Alderwoman Burgess, and then Howman, and then we're once again running out of time.
Okay, so this one's kind of really a difficult one because of how it's kind of coming to us, and it doesn't really seem to fit into this box of an economic development incentive like we've seen other proposals come to us. So what seems to be missing is some of those benchmarks. So if we do this, then, it'll create a certain number of jobs, or a certain amount of money will be invested in the project, or it'll generate a certain amount of tax dollars, and we have a really clear line there where we can see, all right, based on that, we can justify this investment as an economic investment. Here, it's a little bit more, I don't want to undermine it, but it's a little bit more tenuous, right? We're making an assumption that if we lower overheads, X, Y, Z will happen. And so that's really kind of where I'm getting stuck, is it's not a clear line of sight. And it seems to me more that this is not really what I would characterize as an economic development package. It's more like a grant for renewable energy, which is not something that we as a city have done. I'm very supportive of the Habitat and its activities. I'm very supportive of renewable energy efforts in our community, but I don't know how this fits together real well. And that's the question mark. So I feel like the way it's coming to us makes it harder to make a good, solid decision, raises a lot of questions, because again, that's the link between economic development and the installation of a solar array are not real clear to me. I would prefer that if this is something that we as a community want to talk about, incentivizing renewable energy, then we should have that separate conversation so we can come up with a really clear set of parameters for how we would consider those requests. I mean, in this instance, why are we funding it at 100%? Why not 75%? Why not 50%? And I don't know that we have answers to that. And I'll give you a chance, of course, to respond. But those are some of the question marks I have. Why this amount based on this, and what parameters would we use? So that's really kind of where I'm stuck, because it just feels like this is not the best fit, and maybe there's a better way to go about this to really make it clear, because it's going to be really difficult to reliably replicate this and fairly replicate this for anyone else who comes to us with a similar request. And I want to make sure we can do that. At the same time, I want to make it clear that this is a difficult one because of the nature of the entity making the request, because they've done so much good in our community. And we certainly I certainly would not want to create the impression that I'm discouraging of this ask. I'm just concerned that perhaps we're not there yet and really putting together a deal that we can really understand what it means for us and what the implications are.
Well, one of the discussions that Stan and I had in the early phases of trying to figure out what the parameters of the incentive would be was, could Habitat potentially guarantee to build a certain number of homes in the city of Bloomington as a result of receiving this incentive versus homes in McLean County or elsewhere in McLean County. And one of the issues is of the availability of the parcels of real estate on which they could build, and the timing of those is somewhat unknown as to when those would be available. So we determined that really to make that onerous of a requirement on them that you must build 5 homes in X years as a result of this, that must generate X amount of property tax, or else we're taking it back. That wasn't something that we felt could be, put together in that. Again, looking at the goals outlined by the City Council to staff through the comprehensive plan, promote and facilitate energy conservation and alternate energy generation and resources, encourage alternate technologies, diversify energy sources, enhance the image of Bloomington as a business-friendly community, prioritize infill and redevelopment to spur growth and reinvestment in the city, investment along Constitution Trail, the investment that Habitat provides throughout the community. Those were some of the different, things that were being looked at that in evaluating the request. Stan, did you have something?
Well, I just want to speak. You raised a question about connecting the dots, and the one thing that I can tell you is that 100% of the money that we are able, should we be able to save money, is going to go into our program to build homes for people in need of affordable housing. There's not other money in other programs. That's where the money's going. 5 out of 6 houses that we build are built in Bloomington. In most years, it's 6 houses. So
Okay. Thank you.
That's where the money's
Thanks.
going.
At this point, as we're beginning, we've got 2 aldermen that want to speak on this yet, and we're approaching a deadline of yet our next extension. One thing that can be done is it sounds as if Alderman Matthey had a possibility in terms of a change. This could be tabled to another meeting, but I will go to the last 2 members, but certainly tabled to another meeting. It sounds like the council, many on the council are concerned or not quite ready to act on this. But I'm going to go to, I did notice Diana Howman first, and then so Alderwoman Howman, and then Black. And then we're almost out of time again.
Thank you, Mayor. First, I'm kind of disappointed that this ordinance got this far without input from council. I know I asked interim community development director Mark earlier, and his response was that it was brought to us in October of 17, and I don't know where I was. If that was on 3-on-1s or at council meetings, but so I was a little. It seems like we've done a lot of work on this without a lot of input from council. And Stan, and I certainly support what Habitat for Humanity does, both in our community and certainly around the world as well. But I have concerns for 2 reasons. One is that we're in a budget crunch. Our sales tax is flat already. And then the other is, does this set a precedent for other nonprofits or for-profits who come to us for the same kind of incentive? As I mentioned in a previous vote concerning expenses, we cannot be all things to all people, especially right now when we're trying to get a balanced budget on the table. Okay. Thank you.
Alderman Black.
Thank you, and thank you both for coming up. I'll be supporting it with some concerns. I remember talking to David Hales. I think, Austin, you were in that conversation. It was at one of the retreats. I think we talked about this project. And many of the concerns that I've heard, I share precedent setting, and it's just really the best use of economic development dollars. But to me, I'm just looking at nearly $1 million being invested into an area of town that typically doesn't get that type of investment, and that's what's really pushed it over the top for me. I would say that I'm hearing some concern from my colleagues, and if we're going to have a time in which we come back to vote on this proposal in the future, I guess I'd rather, if we're going to make that motion to table it, we give some specific direction on what that looks like before we bring it back or we vote it down this evening, because it wouldn't be fair to Habitat to not be seriously considered if we're not ever going to have the appetite to vote on it at some point in the future. But at a higher level, you'll hear me mention this a couple times tonight. We're putting our eggs in the economic development basket in terms of retail sales, and we've seen those grow flat and decline. A lot of that's online sales and such. And I really want our economic development team, this is a committee of the whole conversation, to really be focused on our assets like our airport, our interstate, our rail, because the more we do of these sorts of projects with such a focus and an eye on retail, the more we're kind of shooting ourselves in the foot based on these national trends. So, I remember Alderman Painter mentioning having a high-end store come to our community, like, the ones you spend big dollar amounts at the mall, because you're not going to buy that online. If we really hone in on those types of things, furniture makes sense to me because you're probably, even though I have bought furniture online, you're probably going to check that out in person, generally. But as we get further away from, we need to get away from retail sales as an engine for how we go about these types of projects, and that's my opinion. Perhaps that comes back in a committee of the whole.
Okay. All right, at this point, and then I just wanted to say that I certainly do share Alderwoman Holloman's concern. I think some of what happened is that this was a project that was developed, and I think you began under the previous city manager, and I think it took on a life of its own, but it is another lesson that we need to make sure that we continue to circle back. At this point, I would entertain, and I think Alderman Black makes a good point, if there's no point in postponing this to a time in the future if the council's already certain or fairly certain that they're not going to approve it. Wouldn't be fair to Habitat, or a motion for approval at this point. So I would entertain either motion, because we're once again out of time. Alderman Matthey.
I would make a motion that we table this until such a time we can explore some language where any renewable energy credits be applied back to the city balance.
Okay, so that's specific. Do we need a time certain? If you want a time certain. We can do it without a time certain. There's no time certain on your motion.
Within 60 days.
Pardon me?
Within 60 days.
It doesn't have to be, though.
Well, no, I mean, that's fine by me.
Do you want 60 days?
Sure. Yes.
Okay. Yes. Okay. All right. So does everybody understand that motion? Is there a second to that motion?
Well, I want to ask a question first.
That's out of order. I need you to answer.
I'll second that motion.
Second by Alderman Schmidt. Question.
Well, I just wanted to know if the 60 days, whatever we're going to do is going to work with the staff that's going to work with it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the implication. Yeah.
The only question I would raise is we allowed time to complete the project, and that's dependent on other people's timing. So if that 60 days added to the end of the year gives us I just want to be cautious about that.
Right.
That was my concern.
Okay, at this point, we have a motion and a second, and this is to, as described by Alderman Matthey, and to come to resolution, postpone this for 60 days. The motion carries 6-2. There are 2 nays to announce, Madam Clerk.
Alderman Black and Alderman Hallman.
Okay, thank you so much, and thank you for all the work you do. Thank you. Okay, we move right along to our next item. That also, in theory, has a 10-minute total time limit. We have 5 minutes, and this is consideration of a resolution affirming the City Council support of the Bloomington Public Library's expansion in its current location. We have a 5-minute presentation by Jean Hamilton, and then a 5-minute council discussion. Thank you.
I'll keep mine very brief. So at the library board meeting on January 23rd of this year, the board asked me to draft a resolution expressing the board's intention to pursue a library expansion at the existing library site, and this resolution was approved on February 20th. So the resolution in front of you today is in support of the resolution that the library board passed.
Okay. Questions of Ms. Hamilton?
May I make a motion and get this in play?
Okay, absolutely.
I would like to make a motion that we approve the resolution as presented to us.
Okay, moved by Alderwoman Schmidt. Is there a second?
Second.
Several seconds. Second by Alderwoman Bray. Alderman Matthey.
What happened to the report we were supposed to get back from that last combined meeting? Has anybody, where we were supposed to see a result from that last meeting that we had, and I didn't see it. What's the status on that report?
Either the clerk or the city manager, do you know what the report? I think you're talking about Deb Halpern's report. Deb Halpern, or no, Stacy.
Stacy and Deb and...
Okay.
So the Deb Halperin is no longer involved in the report, but I believe Stacy's class is doing a report, and I heard from her that would include the needs and steps taken by the library to expand, as well as the needs and steps taken by Connect Transit to build a transfer station, and then the report would then summarize the discussion in the joint meeting as well as aggregate data from the pre-meeting survey, and then it would outline the next steps, decision-making points, and anticipated timelines moving forward on any of the projects.
Alderman Massey, you still have the floor.
Sorry, I was just thinking about what that was. That was a lot of words. So.
Sorry. Do you want to?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Alderwoman Burgess.
Thank you. And to add on to that, I do know that because I've spoken to Stacy Tutt, and for clarification, when you talk about her class, that is her law school students who are part of the Community Preservation Clinic over at the University of Illinois, who have been working on a report since the joint meeting and anticipate issuing that in a very short period of time. I do know that Stacy had requested a short extension of time and asked that this particular agenda item get pushed off to the very next meeting in order to allow that report to be issued prior to council making any decision. It's also my understanding that that request was declined. So
just for clarification on that, I received that request at 6 this morning. So
yes, I wasn't referring to the library. Okay. I was referring to the request to place this on the agenda, which I know you did not personally make. Is that right? I mean, this is an agenda request, Alderman request form.
Right.
Okay. So just a little bit more information on that, which in and of itself is somewhat concerning because I am concerned that perhaps we as a council are not showing that we are open to listen to others and to take in information. And that is a concern in a couple of different regards. I'm a little bit confused as to why we could not be respectful of the amount of time the students have put into that report, and to at the very least wait for it before bringing this up for an agenda item. But there may be considerations outside of my knowledge, but this does not appear to be a time-sensitive issue. So I did want to comment on this because this has turned into a little bit of an interesting topic to talk about, the library expansion project. And I want to make it very, very clear that I personally support the library and its plan to expand. The Bloomington Public Library has been part of our community for over a century now, and I believe it is still just as relevant today to our residents as it was when it opened its doors initially. Secondly, I fully support the library board's desire to continue to explore and look at the feasibility of expansion on site. That is a very responsible part of any potential expansion plans, to first look at the existing conditions and what opportunities are there. That being said, this particular proposal this evening, I will not be supporting because I believe it is premature. And more than anything, I am very concerned that by limiting our analysis at this point, we will prevent ourselves from answering those very important questions, those very important inquiries that we need to be able to answer and to tell the public that we have fully vetted prior to making a decision of this magnitude. This is a major project that will require a substantial investment of taxpayer dollars, and it will be a generational decision, right? And I understand, I get it. I mean, the conversation about expansion has been going on for a while now. I understand that there is a sense of frustration by many people in the community who support the library, a feeling that we are not making enough progress. And I get that. I understand that, but we need to be really honest about where we are right now in that process. And the reality is we are very early when it comes to the question of what an expansion would look like. Right now, the universe of information that we do not know is much larger than what we do know. We don't know right now how much a library expansion will cost, what it will look like, who will pay for it, how we will pay for it. We don't know how big it'll be. We don't know if we're going to build a new building or add on to the existing building. If we expand on site, we don't know if we have to move all of Public Works or part of Public Works. We don't know where it's going to go. We don't know how we're going to pay for that. We don't know what impact that will have on our residents. I mean, the list of things we do not know, unfortunately, is very, very long. And that's okay, because, again, we're early in this process. There's a lot of time to gather that information, to be able to make a case to our residents, ultimately, that this is the responsible thing to do. But what concerns me most is, right now, if we limit that conversation, we will not be able to answer those questions. And one of the biggest questions we all know we're going to get at the end of the day is, if we expand on site, is that the most fiscally responsible decision? And if we don't ask some of these questions about location and what other options are there, we can't answer that question. And then how can we as a council sit up here and say, we have done everything we need to do to prove to you that we can spend tens of millions of dollars on this project, which, you know, may require us to raise taxes? Again, another question mark we don't know the answer to. So it's just, I would urge council to think about this, about how we make the best decision possible when it comes to the library, because we're not going to get another chance to do it over. And we don't know what we don't know. Limiting the conversation now potentially jeopardizes our ability to make a better decision in the future. And so all we have to do at this point in time is allow that information to come into us. We know we have a report coming from the CUNY Preservation Clinic. We know that the the library board is already working on additional due diligence to get answers to some of these questions. So I don't know why we would now, as a council, create the impression that we're not interested in getting all of the information possible.
Okay. Thank you very much. Alderman Black, and then Bray.
Thank you, and thank you, Jeannie, for coming up here and giving us that information. So, you know, even Alderman Sage isn't here. I guess I'll be channeling him this evening. You know, as I've watched kind of some things fall over the last few months in our community, we're going through some profound changes, and that's nerve-wracking. And it makes me very uncomfortable to not kind of see how some of these things shake out for our community. And we can look at analyst projections, we can look at consultant reports, we can, you know, think about it and use it on Facebook or in the Panagraph comments section. But ultimately, what's going to drive that is what actually happens. And it's important to me to be intellectually honest about what priorities are in capital projects. And I support the library. I think it's great. I think it needs to expand. This resolution indicates interest in expanding, although it doesn't commit any city resources to it. My discomfort is that we are looking at several projects, some of which have useful life left in them, some of them don't. If I'm looking at a priority list from my perspective, O'Neill Pool is much higher to me than the library. The library is in a functional building. O'Neill Pool is threatened with not being able to be opened within this year, next year. We're well past our life. So I'm looking at a couple of things here. Our economic realities in this community. How is that going to impact our housing stock? How is it going to impact the jobs that are coming here? What those jobs pay? I get a little nervous. But I'm also hopeful because we are in a position in which we are going to be looking for a new EDC chair. We have the best trained workforce. We have awesome infrastructure, airport, rail, interstates. We need to diversify our tax base and our business base to make sure these sorts of things don't impact us. So for me, what's important is being honest with the community about where I stand on these things. And at this point in time, I'm not comfortable supporting a library expansion in its current location. I'm not really that interested in expanding it at another location, and I want to see how some things fall. And if given a choice in a capital improvement plan, which we'll be seeing here within the next few months, I imagine, I would like to see O'Neill Pool prioritized because that will be a dysfunctional space a lot quicker, perhaps even this summer, than we realize. And that will have a major impact on our community. That will have a major impact on our neighborhoods, whereas we may be able to squeeze some more life out of the library. I know I'm going to probably get some emails from some folks that are going to be upset that are very passionate about the library, and I hear that. But we have to make some realistic assumptions on where we are in this community and what jobs are coming in, what jobs are going out, how much those jobs are paying, what that's going to do for our housing stock, what that's going to do to our assessed value, and what does this future look like. And I think we need to be focused on what I believe to be most important, which is making sure that an asset in our historic core is maintained and able to function before we start talking about expansion either in a current location or in a different location. So I appreciate the idea here when this came forward. We didn't have some of the news that we've gotten, including downtown closures, including job relocations, et cetera, with more to come. But I need to see how some of these things fall before I sign my name off on some of these bigger projects. And I just want to be honest with the community about where I stand.
Okay. Alderman Bray and Howman.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Jeannie, for coming in and speaking to us. I've seconded this motion because I'm very excited and very supportive of the library boards taking action and reviewing all the material that you have and working with the Farnsworth plans that you've commissioned and looking forward to supporting your efforts in going forward with the project that best suits our community. At this juncture, I would say that no surveys or reports were commissioned by this city council to make a decision. That's never been a piece of our decision making. We have a library board that is charged with doing the sweat equity for us here, and they've done it, and they've done it well. They've considered the voices, and so I was a person that worked on Downtown Task Force. The Downtown Task Force did not commission a study, a survey, or a report. I've worked here now on the city council, and the city council did not commission a study, a survey, or a report of any sort in order to make a decision. Instead, we've let you all do the heavy lifting, and you've done it, and thank you for your good work, and I look forward to voting in support of this motion today.
Okay. Alderwoman Howman.
Thank you. Thanks, Jeannie. If I were queen, we'd have one library, Bloomington Normal. I'm not queen. If we were princess, anyway, we have a library board. We have multiple boards and commissions throughout the city because we're not experts in everything as council members. We can't be, and we rely on our board. We rely on our planning commission to come and tell us, yes, this would be a good use of this land. We rely on our transportation. We're starting to rely on our transportation commission to give us input on making changes. If we're not going to support the library board, then God love you. I don't know. I'd come back to another meeting if I were on the library board. So.
Okay, Alderman Miller-Wampoy.
Okay, thank you. Jeannie, thank you for presenting the resolution. I'm in full support of it because I think we need to give the library board some closure. Finally, I think too many years of just going back and forth and who knows, with the way, things change with councils and boards. I mean, if we keep this up, we'll never stop. There will be another bright idea, coming along. So I think we really need to move forward. And as far as, getting any other information, I was at the meeting. I didn't learn anything new. I didn't learn anything earth-shattering. So I'm not expecting anything out of that report. So I'll be supporting your motion. Thank you.
Okay. At this point, we have a motion on the floor and a second. Aye obviously is in favor, and nay is against. The motion carries 6-2. There are 2 nays to announce, Madam Clerk.
Alderman Burgess and Alderman Black.
Okay. We move along to our last set of substantive items this evening. It's a discussion on action and various proposed motions to provide specific direction on closing the $525,000 budget gap within the fiscal year 2019 proposed budget. And I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to City Manager Steve Rasmussen.
Thank you very much, Mayor and members of the City Council. We have 3 proposed motions we're going to bring to you today, and I did want to make one note that we have eliminated the 4th category of these based on some input we had from the City Council. That 4th category was a number of small items. There were $1,000 or $1,500, And we had talked about that at our off-site 2 Saturdays ago, but based on council input, we have instead rolled that into part of the sample motion 1, and I'll talk about that in a minute. Before we start, however, I did want Nicole, our HR director, to come up and talk about this for a moment, because what we have here is 3 motions which will amount to about $525,000 that will balance the budget. Those actually are mostly fee increases, and I've heard some complaints talked about the fact that we have not reduced a number of things, and particularly that we have not reduced our personnel. And I would like to, before we go in and ask for these increases for $500,000, that we are also taking $500,000 out in personnel that I want to remind you about, and talk a little bit about the implication of that, because every position we don't fill is work that doesn't get done, customer service that gets delayed. So we are building that in, and that balances out the increase in fees we're asking. And so we have not talked much about those vacancy savings this period of time. And so I asked Nicole if she'd give us a brief rundown about that before we go into these 3 sample motions. Nicole?
Thank you. As Interim City Manager Rasmussen let you know, we have heard concerns and wanted to address those this evening. The main concerns that we're hearing is that the City of Bloomington is not making any position cuts to address the budget deficit. We've also heard recent concerns with our employee compensation being out of line or out of control, and so he had asked us to put just a few slides together to talk to you about the efforts that we have made recently and plan to continue to make to address these concerns, and also to help close the gap of the budget deficit. So in terms of salary and benefit savings, we do want to let you know we are going to experience, whether it be a nominal amount or not, but a fiscal year 2018 benefit and salary savings. So we will come in under budget, which is obviously great news. And we want to let you know that that is something that we pay very close attention to. In terms of workers' compensation savings, I had mentioned to you a couple of weeks ago, and I'll say it again here, we take this area of benefit very seriously as well. We have Alex Rosas, who's our safety and risk manager, pays very close attention to this. I don't want to throw out any dollar amounts because we are still compiling those, but we are in the neighborhood of coming in currently year-to-date under budget in the neighborhood of $200,000 to $250,000. So I want to give credit where credit is due. We are definitely seeing a savings there in our workers' compensation. Medical plan changes, I have a slide that I'll show you on that, and soft hiring freeze policy we want to talk a little bit about. So in terms of the medical plan changes, we wanted to highlight for you some changes we have made and some future changes that we plan to make. In 2017, you may recall we implemented membership with the IBPC, and in doing so, we have seen a very positive movement in our claims cost and in our risk avoidance. 2018, we only experienced a premium increase of 3% in the PPO, 1% of the HMO. You may look at that and think, well, yes, but that is a cost increase. However, we would have, had we not joined the IBPC, probably seen more of a 7 to 8% increase in those premium rates, and so we wanted to highlight that that is definitely an area of cost avoidance. 2019, we have been working on implementing what we're calling a working spouse eligibility, which will also result in significant cost savings. Essentially what we're saying here is if you have a spouse that's currently on the plan after a certain date and they have other eligible health insurance costs, we will be removing those from the plan. This is an item that we are negotiating with our union groups right now, but that is an area of definite cost savings for us for plan year 2019. We also are looking at some plan design changes for 2019 that we are working with our unions to, in our classified groups to not only cost contain but also see a cost savings. And then our current claim experience is very positive at this point, if everyone can knock on some wood. So we do anticipate seeing some cost savings there. And lastly, I want to highlight for you one policy that we are planning on putting into place effective May 1st, 2019 to align with the fiscal year, in that all of our vacancies will remain open for 90 days unless they are deemed to be a key position by the city manager. We will experience a cost savings here. So what we're trying to do is really avoid the need to cut positions by reducing our time to hire, increasing our time to hire metric to get that salary and benefit savings. Key positions that we will work directly with the city manager on will be director and or department heads, and those that we deem to be critical for public safety, customer service, or overtime avoidance. And one area I didn't put up here, but I should have, and that's also the workers' comp area and the safety avoidance. So if we deem a position to be critical and necessary to avoid injury to our current employees, we will take a harder look at that. But these are all areas that we're attempting to get into place, pay close attention on, continue to pay close attention on to really get at that vacancy savings for the next year. Any questions?
Questions of Nicole? Thank you so much, and thank you for all your hard work and helping to make all this happen. So turn it back over to Mr. Rasmussen.
Just want to get the calendar up there. There we go. All right, good, thanks. Okay, thank you very much. Lost somewhere there in the Ethernet. Okay, thank you very much, Nicole. And what that does is that gives us a perspective that we have about $500,000 worth of savings in that area as we now go into balance the budget with the extra $525,000 we're talking about now. And I hope that we can wrap this up very quickly. As we go through these things, you can, of course, vote to do one of these or none of these or some combination thereof. But as you can see on the calendar, we now are up against the next council meeting where we will adopt the budget, and we'll bring that forward to you. The proposed budget that we had last month is now out there, and it's published, and it's balanced, and it has in it these things we're talking about tonight. But of course, what we'll do is when we come back to you for the budget adoption, we'll bring you back an amendment that shows all the changes that you would like to put into this budget to make the final budget what you would like, and that would be adjusted from the proposed budget that you have. We have three things here tonight. As I've said before, we put all the cards on the table at once because then you can see what goes on in the first one may be affected by what goes on in the third thing. I'm not going to go over them in great detail because you've seen them many times before, and we talked about them on Saturday. And so I'd like to go ahead and talk about the first one here, and this is the cost recovery. The cost recovery has three different possibilities. One is make that bigger for me? Okay, a little bit bigger. The first one has a cost recovery fee of a one-time increase to bring this more in line with what other fees are, with the possibility of a 2.5% increase per year. This would be the amount of a 5%, kind of an automatic increase that would occur based on the decisions of the department heads unless the council chose otherwise, and we would bring those back to you. The second motion is to do the same thing except without the annual fee increase, and the third one is to just do the fee increase without the initial increase. All of these amount to $225,000. When I showed it to you before, it was $175,000, but we added $50,000 to this because we took out that fourth sample with all of those small items. So how is it we add another $50,000 to this? Well, I'll give you an example. It's the annexation fee, which we were charging $100 for, and Normal was charging $1,000 for. So if, for example, we suggested we were going to move that up to be $250, Well, we could now move it up to be $350,000. And when you go through that sort of thing in 800 different fees, we can absorb that $50,000 that we were going to
I think
talk
you meant
about.
350, not 350,000.
Pardon me?
I think you meant $350 for an annexation.
Oh, yeah, $350.
Just wanted to clarify that so that.
Right. Well, a few zeros.
There might have been people listening online who are about to have a heart attack.
Right. $350, excuse me. Thank you for the correction.
And I think maybe what we can do, again, just in terms of cost recovery, in clarifying, we're talking about building code safety, annexation agreements, false alarms, et cetera, those kinds of fees where we're recouping our costs.
Exactly. I'm going to ask Bob Mart. He's going to pass that around to you. Some people would say, well, what are we talking about? Well, he's got all of those, and it's about 5 pages of small print and 800 different fees, but if you wanted to look through, you could kind of see what those look like, but that's what we're talking about. And what we would do is then we would come back to you during the next couple of months with the actual actions to take action on these, because some of these require us to change ordinances. We aren't asking to do that just today. What we're saying is if you would like to move forward with that, we'll put that into the budget, and then we'll come back to you in the coming weeks with the kinds of ordinance that will affect some of them, because some of them require changes.
So this is essentially, these motions are essentially staff directions to balance the budget, just to clarify for everyone. This is not final action. You don't have the timetable on there, but essentially that's what we're talking about here. Now, we could take these in any number of ways. I would say with respect to the first one, we could start out with the first motion. If it doesn't pass, we can move to the second.
Yes, and motion 1 is a staff recommendation.
Motion 1 is the staff recommendation. Okay, there is a sample one, and that is that the city have a biannual, so every 2 years, 5% increase. Is there a motion in support of that? I'm sorry. Question. We can put the motion on the, it says there's a second.
I'll move that we...
move the staff's recommendation of motion 1. Is there a second to that?
I'll second that.
Second, okay, by Alderwoman Bray. Now, I'm sorry.
Just a question for clarification here. In your verbal presentation, you said a possible 2.5% every year or 5% biennial increase. The motion itself seems like it's automatic, so could you speak to that?
Yes, the way that we would propose doing that is that the staff department heads would have the authority to come back and put those things in automatically unless the council said not to do that. So what we would do is we would bring to you a sheet like this that shows you the current fees and the ones then that we would recommend. And if someone sees one on those and says, oh no, I don't want to do this, well then we could vote on that and take it off of that. But absent council action, we would look at a 2.5% increase, not more than a 2.5% increase each year, but we'd only do that every 2 years, so you wouldn't nickel and dime people together every year with a change.
Right, but you're suggesting that then a new fee schedule would come before council for review?
Yes, that's right.
Okay. Appreciate it.
All right. Okay, we have a motion on the floor and a second, and if everyone will vote on that. Oh, I'm sorry, Scott.
No problem.
Didn't see your light.
Yes. Thank you, Steve. This is excellent information. So I'll be voting for the motion, assuming that I have this piece correct here, and I think we've talked about this before, but I want to make it crystal clear, is that a lot of these ones like false alarms and then special event street closures, we're going to have that spelled out more for us at some later point.
Yeah, absolutely, because this is $225,000 worth of fees, but a lot of those require some individual work. So we will be coming back to you with those individually as we go through the next coming weeks. But the total will come out to be $225,000, more or less.
Sure. So that's fine, and I appreciate that. I just would say that with false alarms, we just want to be crystal clear about what that is, how it's defined, if it's somebody rattling a window versus bad wiring or somebody pressing the wrong button too many times.
Sure.
For street closures for special events, I don't want the city to be a hindrance in those types of events to come here. So if it becomes cost prohibitive, we get ancillary benefits from people coming to our community, having dinner, seeing a movie,
Jazz
or whatever.
Fest, whatever.
Jazz Fest, whatever.
Yeah, sure.
And I don't want us to become the kind of the wall that says, well, you got to pay some amount of money, a couple $100, and then that makes it go somewhere else or not happen at all.
Yes, and what this is I would call this the automatic fee increase ordinance, and many cities do something like that. And what it's designed to do is not to inhibit the kind of thing you're talking about, but to prevent us from having some fee that has not been increased in 15 years just because there was never a vehicle to bring it forward. This kind of brings it forward unless council decides not to do it.
Alderman Milwaukee.
Okay, thank you. Steve, for those fees that you're going to bring back to council, so what if the council does not approve those fees? What
Sure.
happens in terms of balancing the budget, getting to that $225,000?
Sure. Let's say that one of those fees requires an ordinance change and the council decides not to change that. Okay, we won't change that, but in the 800 different ones, there will be enough that will ultimately balance it out to be that amount. It may be that some changes, instead of being it was $13 for a permit and we're recommending it $15, maybe we'll make it $16. But out of 800, we'll get pretty close to that. And if we don't have it exactly, we don't need to worry about that because there'll be enough other things in the budget that will be fluctuating up and down that will make it. This is just in anticipation of that we will balance the budget with $225,000 of fee increases. Some we may do and some we won't, but in the main, they'll all work out to be about that number.
I do just want to thank you and the staff for doing this without external consultants spending a lot of money. Usually that's what happens. In fact, when I was on the county board, we did this in 2002, I believe. Actually, there hadn't been some fees that had been raised since Hitler invaded Poland. And so we had an external consultant come in, and we paid for their salaries in the process and more. But I'm glad that staff was able to do that, or is in the process of doing this.
Well, thank you, and I want to thank Bob Martin and his staff for putting that together. They've been working on this list for a couple of weeks.
Okay. At this point, we have a motion on the floor and a second. And then if this one does not pass, we'll move on to the next. Okay, it passes 8-0. There are no nays to announce. Madam Clerk. We move on to the second, which are parking fees, and I think you might want to clarify
Thank you very
that
much.
some of that is traffic enforcement. Actually, as I understand, most of that is traffic enforcement rather than special event fees.
That's right. What happens is there's only one motion here, and really this one does not require council action, but we would like to have council approval to do that, and we'll do that by a vote, because if there's somebody who objects to us doing that, we won't. But most of the things in here can be done at the staff level. We started out with $400,000 here because we're putting in the new automatic parking deck facilities in, we think it'll come in August. And if we turn those things all the time and you paid for parking day and night, 24 hours a day, it'd be $400,000. But we don't want to do that for a number of reasons, because there are a lot of times that downtown that we don't want to charge for parking because we want to encourage other events. So what we've done is we reduced this down to a small amount. And what it does is during the coming years, we can, if we decide we want to change that and you'd like to charge for another event, we just can set that those machines automatically and do that. But right now, we're not proposing doing that. What we're proposing doing here is only two things. One is to do more rigorous execution of our plan to collect fees for overdue parking tickets. And we've got a collection agency that will do that, and also that we have now the automated system. It frees up those attendants, and so instead of being the attendants collecting money at the parking garages, they'll be able to go downtown where we have hourly parking, and they'll be able to more rigorously enforce that. Throughout that process, we anticipate getting much of this, perhaps $40,000 or so back. The second half of it is that we do have the opportunity to then charge for special events, and it could be a small amount. It could be $5 for one special event, or $10 for event, and in certain decks for certain hours. That will be dependent upon what events we have and when we choose to charge for it. But we'll work that out in conjunction with the Coliseum and the Downtown Development Division, and we'll add in a small amount. We put in $60,000 for that. It will fluctuate based upon the events that we have and what hours we want to use, but we anticipate very conservatively we can gain those kind of fees.
Okay. All right. Questions or a motion?
I'll move that we...
Accept staff's recommendation on that?
Yes.
Okay. Is there a second on that?
Second.
Second by Alderwoman Painter. Any further discussion? Okay, if everyone will vote on that. The motion carries 6-2. There are 2 nays to announce, Madam Clerk.
Alderman Mathy and Alderman Black.
Okay. And we go to our last item, business registration, and I'll turn that over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mayor. This one gets a little more complicated. What we have is we have proposed a business registration fee, and this is opposed to a licensing fee. The registration fee only gets us the anticipation of who there is that is conducting business, and we can do this by charging a nominal fee. We were proposing $50 as a initial fee with a $50 amount to be paid every year, because what happens is we have to cover the fee every year. And we've been asked some questions about what those things cover, and we certainly can go into that in detail. Mr. Mark can answer some of that. But I think the important thing to say is that the amount of money that we anticipate covering there for $200,000 a year covers the things that we are already doing. Most of that we're doing now, for which we're not reimbursed, and that's why the Community Development Department has a continual deficit, and they have to put other monies into them. This is really recovering the fees of what we're already doing. Some of the things, though, we may have to do new as we begin to get more businesses signed up, so there will be some more, but basically this is an anticipation of covering the cost of the services we also provide. And the reason we would want to do it on an annual basis, that's renewable every year, is because those services continue every year. It's not like we do it 1 year and then it stops. The services continue every year. The other 2 motions are to do it as a one-time fee without an annual increase. What that would probably mean is we would be back again next year asking for it again. Or the third motion would be to do it with a registration without any fees. The problem, of course, that we have is that any business has to cover its expenses, and this is one way that we would want to cover our expenses and cover it on an ongoing basis. It's kind of like the first motion that we voted on, and that was the automatic fee increase. This is one that has to continue to go on a regular basis so that we cover the fees each year that we provide the service.
So the core thing that is common in all of these is the business registration, and I believe the Chamber was in favor of business registration. Not all were in favor of regular fees, but
yes, that's correct.
So that is, I think that's the commonality. So essentially, motion 1 would be $50, and then an annual basis. We could see if that passed. If that did not pass, we could try $50 on a one-shot basis, or business registration with no charge. So those are essentially the council's options at this point to give guidance to staff. And I'm going to go ahead and go from left to right. Alderwoman Howman and Black. Howman and Black.
I would like to move sample motion 2, business owner registration, one-time fee to cover the cost, assuming then that we could look at that again next year. But so
okay.
Sample motion 2.
You're moving for motion 2.
Yes.
Okay. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Second by Alderwoman Painter. Okay. Now, is there discussion on sample motion 2? I thought we'd start out with 1, 2, 3, but obviously we can do it however we want. Alderman Mathy. Yeah.
Sorry. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you. One of the questions that I had that didn't get answered is So we answered the question that home-based businesses would be exempt from this, and that's your folks who might be selling Mary Kay, Avon, running an Etsy store, things of that nature, and we said they would be exempt from the fee. But the one that I didn't get answered is I know property owners in Bloomington who, if they have multiple rental buildings, every building is a separate registered LLC. And so, the answer I got from the question earlier was anybody who's conducting business. Well, if you're renting out a building, you're conducting business in Bloomington. So that means that there are some folks in town who could be getting hit with, I could think of one guy who's probably going to potentially get hit with 20 different $50 fees because he owns 20 buildings and every single building is a separate registered LLC for liability reasons. So I'm just concerned about that there's an awful lot of unknowns here if we're going to charge a fee of what that looks like to individual people in town.
Yes. Two things about that. First of all, there are a lot of things in this ordinance that we'll have to clarify, and we didn't write the ordinance and bring it to you today because it's fairly complicated because a lot of those things that are in it, and we don't want to do that if we're not moving forward on it. But as we move forward, we'll get all the answers to that, and as we talked about with Mr. Mulumbu's question about some of the fees, as we go along, some of this may change a little bit as we go forward. I also would like to apologize for your not having...
I was going to say, the short answer to that question is no, we're not going to charge.
Yeah, that was the second thing. Good. I was going to ask Bob to come up and answer that question. Bob, did you have anything to add to that?
Yeah.
Okay, got it.
So that's something that if this were approved conceptually, we're not charging. If somebody's got 20 buildings, they're one company.
We just care about, the downtown storefront, not the person that owns the downtown storefront.
Okay. Alderman Milawambwe, we'll go this way through.
So you said earlier that you were going to talk about the kinds of services that are being provided, because I think where people are a little bit unsure is, are there, things that are being exchanged, between the city and these particular businesses. And so I'd like to know what are we providing right now? What sort of value are people going to get for that $50?
Sure. I'm glad you asked that question because I've been trying to get Bob up here to talk about that. Go ahead, Bob.
Bob, come on.
Thought we were getting through this evening. So some of the, let me just kind of explain the Community Development Department and cost recovery within our department. We basically have 5 divisions. The first division is building safety, and we basically have generally $1.2 million in expenditures and $1 million in revenues. And those revenues are generated through our building permit fees and the like. And then our next division would be the Code Enforcement Division, and they have a budget of roughly $950,000, and they have revenues of $313,000. And that $313,000 is basically from $250,000 in our rental inspection program and some other fees that are generated from that. So you start seeing that cost recovery starts dropping off as we go through the department. So when going back into the building safety, you understand that when you pull a building permit, you get the direct service of an inspector coming out there, first evaluating that from the construction plans, and then going out to the site to see that it was properly installed, and then issuing you that occupancy permit. One of the fees that we're not recovering in the building safety program is our fire inspectors. And so we have 2 fire inspectors and a fire systems inspector. And so those inspectors, by Chapter 17 of the Municipal Code, are required to periodically, it says every year, to inspect commercial buildings within the community. They're probably on a 3-year cycle, very similar to our rental property inspection program. So the intent being is that we're getting through those commercial properties to verify means of egress, exit lights, whether or not they're blocking access, and then looking at their storage kind of things. The biggest thing that we have here is that we are required by our code to annually inspect daycare centers, nursing homes, and rooming houses. So those are ones that do get the annual inspection. In addition, when we have a new liquor license, when that new liquor license is issued, we're mandated to go out and do that inspection there. So what we're missing is this cycle of doing all these commercial buildings within the city. And if we're talking between 2,000 and 4,000 businesses, we're obligated to go through those essentially with no charge at all for that service. So it's essentially, we're asking for this cost recovery, which is essentially a user fee for having that commercial business.
And is that the reason why you're not doing the same thing for home-based?
If I could add one thing, one of the things that is so important about that is when Bob talks about going out and looking at those 2,000 and 4,000 businesses and inspecting for fire and egresses, oftentimes we don't know that they're there. We need to inspect them, but we can't inspect them because we don't know where they are. What the registration business does is the registration program will allow us to know where all they are, and so we can go out and do those required inspections. And then the home-based business?
Yeah, the home-based business, it's very difficult to track the home-based businesses, and we want to encourage their entrepreneurship. But I guess what we'd have to say is that we'd want them to actually register their home-based business, but not necessarily have to pay the fee, because that's very difficult to track. And I think it's more to be a part of the system and not necessarily be part of the program, I guess, if you can be on the business directory as opposed to being in the actual program.
All right, thank you.
And we will then bring the actual ordinance back to you, which will spell out these things and many other questions. I'm sure we'll have many meetings about it and some interim meetings with you as well before we actually have an ordinance put in place for it.
Alderwoman Burgess and Painter and poor Alderman Black that I forgot. Okay.
I have a question about basically sample motion 2 versus 1. So my question is, if we were to vote in favor of sample motion 2 as opposed to sample motion 1, am I correct in understanding that the $50 is basically our cost of administrating this program on a yearly basis? So basically we'd have a hole in our budget for next year unless we took action?
I would see it, it's a one-time fee that you pay it when you register. So if you've registered this year, you don't pay it next year, but next year if we get new businesses, each time we get one, it would be a one-time registration fee under that sample motion. Go ahead.
Okay.
I would say that, just to add, the one-time fee is not to cover the administration of the program. It's to add the cost recovery to the other programs we're providing to those commercial businesses. So when we look at this customer service portal, working with IT, we don't believe it's going to certainly not be anywhere near the cost, and that's in comparison to some of our other programs like the rental property inspection program and our contractor registration programs.
Which I think is why your suggestion the motion 1 would do it every year so you continue to recover that.
Right.
But yes.
Okay. I've now confused myself. So let me ask another question. But I'm correct. Sample motion 1 is $50 every year for every business that registers. Okay. And then sample 2 and motion 2 is just one-time fee. When you register, you pay $50 fee, then you're done.
Correct.
Okay.
And we had one time talked about if they were to relocate and it requires them to re-enter their form, we might consider that as well. That they would have to reapply as a relocated business, but that's some of the
because you'd have to inspect that new property. Okay.
Okay. And unfortunately, Diana left. I was going to ask her to help me understand the potential benefits of 1 versus 2 or 2 versus 1, since the motion on the floor is 2. Okay. But if anyone else wants to jump in and share your thoughts, I'd appreciate that.
Okay. Alderwoman Painter.
Well, I'll share my thoughts about that. The reason I voted for what I did was because I'm concerned about the cost of executing this program every year. You know, if I could tweak this, I would say a one-time fee of $100 rather than $50, because I think that would help us out more. But I'm also concerned if we do this every year that we may have to hire a new person to oversee all of this, and I think that would wipe out any of the benefits that we would accrue from having this in the first place. So that's why I felt that this was the better choice.
Yeah, if I can answer that question, we won't have to hire somebody else because we're doing most of that now. So we're just covering the costs that we've got now.
Okay.
Ready? Let's see. Alderman Black, and then back to Alderman Matthey.
Yeah, thank you, Steve and Bob, for that detailed information. I know we've talked about this in the past, and we've kind of seen some things flushed out here. I'm going to be voting no on this one, because I don't think this is something that we should be doing at all at this point in time. We need to see how a couple chips fall. Maybe we can come back to this a year from now. I would say 3 to 6 months ago, I'd never even heard of this as a notion, and now we're talking about it in a budget pinch. So I kind of want to see, if we weren't doing this in the past, even though we're kind of doing some of the work, I'm just uncomfortable with how this is all kind of played out and the buy-in from the community. So I'm going to be voting no. I think there's no option up there to have a sample motion to make no change to previous practice, but...
Yeah, if you don't vote no to all three. Yeah, that's
I just
right.
may.
Yeah, okay.
If nothing gets 5 votes, that means we don't do it.
You're on. Alderman Schmidt, Alderwoman Schmidt, and then Matthey. You haven't spoken yet.
Well, okay. I am confused about why this is even $50. I think I heard Mr. Mart say that really the infrastructure for this is in place. So if somebody fills out a form and dumps it in a file, and we have the registration. So I don't know why it's $50, and I don't know how we arrived at $50.
I'm going to ask the corporate counsel to talk about the $50 fee.
Well, yeah, some of the community development stuff is in place, but the actual form, we're going to have to work on the database. There's a lot of things that are going to go into it that's not in place yet. So while some of the community development stuff is in process, the actual, registration program is not. That is something that we'll have to all work together.
And is
Okay,
the
but I think
$50
that
based on...
the question was why not $100 or $200?
Yeah, we tried to keep it as a nominal amount. Not, whether, $50, we talked about $7,500, it could be any of those numbers. There are communities, the ones that we looked at, it was more around the $50 range. So we thought with kind of trying to budget those amounts, that was something that we could utilize in terms of both getting the program up and running as well as the cost recovery that Director Mart talked about.
Okay.
It's not an exact science, that is for sure.
Alderman Matthey.
So I wanted to add that I'm going to be voting no to all 3 of these motions for many of the same reasons that Scott said. I'm concerned about the cost of operating this sort of program. One of my thoughts is it came up earlier that there are businesses out there that we don't know exist right now. Well, if we don't know they exist, how are we going to get to those businesses to tell them that they should pay a fee so that we know that they exist? That seems like a negative circular logic to me there. And I was just having the thought that this entire concept is great, and I can see the value of it, but it seems to me that this might be better implemented, and it could be one of the things that we ask. We just provided money to fund the BN Advantage, and they have better contacts than we do in terms of connecting with the business community and can add different value than we can to that. It might be one of those things where we could say to the Chamber, the BN Advantage Group, the EDC, however you want to phrase that we would like you to undertake this particular project, and it's probably good for not just the city of Bloomington, but also the town of Normal as well, to have a complete listing of all the businesses and have that knowledge available to outside developers and even people who are interested in starting businesses to see what kind of potential competition might exist or what needs are available in the community. I don't see that there's a good way for us to undertake this and make this happen where people are going to want to voluntarily sign themselves up and say, I volunteer to pay $50 for this registration if we don't already know they exist. So
Yeah.
I'm
Well,
going to be voting no on all these.
If I could answer one of those questions, and that is, how do you know about people that aren't out there? What happens is, we have people that come in frequently because they want to start a business and they want to know how they get a business license. And what happens is, we say, you don't have to have a business license, and they go, yippee, and off they go. And then what happens, we find out about them because there's a code violation that we have to go back out, and we have to get them to tear out a wall so we can inspect their electricity or something. So how would we know? Well, we'd find a lot of them because they come in and ask, is what happens. And we're one of the few communities that don't have any kind of a license or a registration program.
Well then, so let's say, for instance, I have a business and I don't respond to the request for registering the business. What happens at that point? Now we have another person who's involved to manage that process, to find all the businesses that didn't respond the first time, to send a second notification and a third notification, and so on and so forth. And then do they end up in administrative court because they never registered the first time? It just seems like this is all going to go sideways on us really quickly.
In answer to that question, how does that happen? That's what we do every day.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
And then just to clarify, the Being Advantage might be very interested in having a list, but they're not going to perform any kind of safety checks, internally. That's not.
Well, we're already doing the safety checks. We need somebody to find a list.
Right. Well, that's why this is a budget. That part of it's the budget cost recovery, I think, from the administrative standpoint. Anyway, Alderwoman Burgess, and I think that's it.
Okay, so I think we've hit on some really good points today on why a business registration program is really important for our community from a safety point of view, from a metrics and economic development point of view. I think the program itself is one that I think that we really do need in the community, and I think staff has given a lot of thought into whether or not we can integrate this into our existing systems, and I have confidence they can. So I hope that we would move forward at least on registration in some way. Of course, there's always the other thing looming over us is if we don't improve any of the ones that have some form of cost recovery on it, we are going to have a $200,000 hole in our budget, which we will have to quickly fill. But just as a reminder, I mean, obviously, we'll deal with that. But I think on the whole, there's a lot of reasons to have this program, whether or not there's a fee associated with it. I would prefer to see that we do cost recovery because there will be cost. So that's it. Let's vote.
Okay. All right, let's vote.
Before you vote, I think Amelia raises a very good question. If we vote not to do this, we now have a $200,000 gap in the budget, and we would like some direction as to how you would like us to fill that as well.
Okay. All right. At this point, we will see whether this passes or not. Okay, somebody hasn't voted. Okay, there are, the vote is 4-4. There are 4 nays to announce, Madam Clerk.
Alderman Matthey, Alderman, Malumway, Alderman Schmidt, and Alderman Black.
And I will vote aye. Okay.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay. All right. At this point, well, then we don't have to have the discussion of the $200,000.
Oh, yeah, we will.
Next year we will.
I had Scott here.
We'll have a lot more than $200,000.
Scott had a list of 200. He had a whole page of $200,000.
Oh, gosh. Okay. All right. At this point, we're going to turn to City Manager's discussion. Mr. Rasmussen.
Thank you very much. I wanted to put one slide up. I should have put it up while I was up there, but what I wanted to do was show you the upcoming events that we have, and I wanted to show you that each time for the next month. We've got the ones from the Bloomington Center for the Performing Arts, Grossinger Arena, Pepsi Ice Center, the Bloomington Public Library, McLean County Arts Center, and McLean County Museum of History. And I'm going to include this in my weekly update for you each week so that everyone will get some visibility about what's coming up, and so the public also at this evening can see those things, because we have lots of things going on downtown, and the Downtown Development Division will provide this for us every 2 weeks. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you. And I just, for the record, wanted to thank all the people who participated in the protests, march yesterday and today. Obviously, this is democracy in action. It's people exercising their First Amendment rights. And just to clarify, there has been continued discussion among several aldermen and myself and Mayor Coos about welcoming city ordinances. It's not as if that discussion hasn't continued. The other thing that I just wanted to reiterate is that I will have the open house a week from this Friday. I'll have it in the traditional way that I've had it in the past, and that is we'll sit around the fishbowl, and I will show, if you go to the Lorraine Motel where Martin Luther King was assassinated in 1968, it's actually a museum today. And if you go in there, I bought the tape that you'll see. It's 22 minutes of his assassination called Witness, and we'll look at that, just talk a little bit of Dr. King. We will have plenty of time, at least half the time, for fixing potholes or any other issues that you may have as well, for that, or any other kinds of considerations that you have. But that will be 1 week from Friday at 4:30, and certainly all are welcome. And that's all that I have. Let's see, I think there was something else I was supposed to say, but I can't find my scrawls. We'll start with Alderman Matthey.
So 2 quick things. I want to know, how do we get this list to all the people who keep telling me there's nothing to do in Bloomington? And the second thing is, as I was noticing, that we might need to find a bigger table for our media friends over here because they're piled in like sardines over here. So
budget cuts. I'm kidding. Table it. Oh, okay. I'm kidding. Okay. Alderman Milawambwe.
Yeah, thank you. I wanted to take a couple of minutes to address the welcoming city ordinance that we've
address whatever you want.
Yeah, we've heard a number of folks discuss the issue. As a matter of fact, I actually had what it seems like there was some sort of a protest on the ISU quad. That's what it was, how it was described to me, asking me to, how would you say, to be more supportive of the ordinance. There
was an ISU protest just for you?
That's how it was described. My name was used, and today, and a Facebook post that I was tagged on, which I thought was interesting. And the way it was described to me is that people were disappointed that nobody from the administration came out, because it was, I guess, near Hovey. Nobody came out to address, those who were protesting. And I think it was students. I'm not sure. But I thought, okay, great. I was at lunch, so I wasn't there. But in any case, I think what kind of came out of all of that, and just listening to some of the comments here, I wanted to be able to reiterate that we, several of us who have had, conversations, I don't think we're opposed to doing anything. But I think what is more accurate to say is that we just have a difference of opinion on how we're going to, to get to where people want, and as you referenced, this is it's a democracy, so I think it's it's okay to have a difference of opinion. So I think from this point forward, I want the conversation to be, a little bit more thoughtful, so that, and you've heard today, there was a reference made that there have been some hurt feelings, in this whole process, and I don't think there should be. We're a community. We try to work together, and I've always seen Bloomington as a place where we're a lot more relational, and so because somebody doesn't agree with you, doesn't necessarily mean that you just kind of, place them over there in the corner and have people being at times, critical in a way that can be, that can seem hurtful, at least to the person that's receiving it. So hopefully we can have what I would call a more productive conversation where we're not necessarily shouting at one another. And that's why I've resisted, saying much, because I know that sometimes words can be dissected and interpreted in a way that they're not meant. So we have to be extremely careful with that, because the issue is extremely sensitive to a lot of people. And one of the things that I've been concerned about is the fact that the issue has been described in ways that are, I would say, binary. It's either this way or that way. But I actually think it's a lot more complicated. It's a lot more complex than that. And I think if we are able, as a council, that's our responsibility, to craft a process, that allows everybody to express themselves in a way that's respectful, thoughtful. We may learn a lot more than we did at the beginning. I love the enthusiasm of activists. It's great. But one of the things that I think as an activist, is important to recognize that activists are a lot closer to the issue than others are. So it's important to kind of take care to make sure that the people who are not as close to the issue become more familiar over time. And when they do, one might realize that you can find actually more supporters, once people are a little bit more educated on the issue. Like I said, the issue is very complex. I've been following very carefully ever since the conversation started, what's going on in California. And every day I learn something new about what's going on, So I have a lot of questions. I mean, I as a council member, I think I have a strong responsibility for being very careful with what it is that we do and what the impact is going to be to folks. So, prime example in California, having declared itself a sanctuary city. Well, ICE decided to enforce with a little bit more aggressively, and in that process, some people are being hurt that people didn't even think were necessarily going to be hurt. So I have to think about all those things. What is our backup plan? After an ordinance is passed. And some people have suggested to me, well, if you pass the ordinance, and if lots of cities pass the ordinance, then the federal government will be overwhelmed. They won't know what to do and where to go. I said, that's great, but what if they say, we're picking Bloomington? That's where we're going. And I don't care about the other ones. So I have to think about that, in how I craft a solution to this particular problem. So, again, I don't want to be too long-winded, but I just want for us to be able to talk about a process by which we're going to talk about the issue, address the issue, assess the situation on the ground, and know exactly what we're talking about, and then just kind of go from there. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Alderwoman Burgess.
Okay, two things. First is to actually dovetail on what you were just discussing, and so my question, though, is one to Mayor Renner. What is our process here? Because we have a lot of residents who are trying very, very hard to get our attention, and what they're asking is for us to have a public debate and make a public decision on whether or not we want to adopt a welcoming city ordinance. So what does that look like? Are we going to be bringing this back on an agenda at some point in time? Do you know yet? What does it look like?
Well, a good question. Essentially, just to do the the quick backdrop, obviously this has been discussed, some people said for a year, since a little after the beginning of the Trump administration. And I think somebody had cited there was a 40-some% increase in deportations of non-criminal individuals. So for a lot of reasons, that's having a ripple effect at all cities. When I go to the U.S. Conference of Mayors, this comes up. And there's a fundamental difference between a sanctuary city and a welcoming city, at least in terms of the types of ordinances. And I think, so that's some of the backdrop. We did discuss this formally in December as a council, and the direction from in December was maybe we see what normal has done. I mean, it wasn't as clear perhaps as it could be. There were a variety of different attitudes expressed, but that we would bring something back. I did have a couple of aldermen ask me, why didn't we bring it January 23rd? That was a month later. The staff had something, developed. And I had heard from one directly and a couple of, indirectly, that there were some who said they needed more time. So that's why I said, okay, well, how about 3 weeks later, right? So, I mean, there was nothing magical about 3 weeks later to February 12th. And then we had 5 aldermen say that they did not want to talk about, or they did not want it on that agenda on February 12th. And we had some of the supporters saying there are still things to work out. I think this is going back to what Alderman Milwaukee was suggesting, that this is not binary, that there are some nuances that needed to be worked out. So in talking to Mr. Rasmussen and I, who are the ones who have direct, administrative control according to statute and ordinance over, the agenda or organizing the agenda, we pulled it, okay? So it was not on that agenda. That doesn't mean that it cannot be brought back. From my perspective, there's no point in bringing something back that might create, as Alderman Milwaukee said, some hurt feelings, especially if it's not going to pass. So that we have had other discussions between some of the other members of the city council and myself and the town of Normal that seemed to change their mind, although I'm still not 100% sure. And then there is a different group, a welcoming city group that I did speak with Nan Whaley, the mayor of Dayton, who's been part of this. She's running for governor of Ohio, so she didn't have a lot of time to talk to me. But she did, say that it had worked well. It did. It passed the city council in Dayton, not that it wouldn't hear necessarily, but it passed city council in Dayton. The legal team in Dayton gave it, they said there's virtually no probability that you're going to be scrutinized by ICE with this kind of language, right? I have not gone through and read what they had passed, but we did have a different version as of the end of January here locally that our police chief and our legal counsel seem to be in favor of, or by in favor of. They said we don't see any problems administering this. I should make that clear. In favor of is not the right way to put it. But that was something that some people who supported it wanted to change and to tweak. Okay, and that's why they asked us to pull it. So at this point, we have had continual discussions among several of the council members, some of who were on either side, and by either side, I don't mean it to be binary, yes or no, welcoming city, just whether or not we would have voted on it back in February 12th, right? And so it is still there. It could be brought up at any time, but it does seem that we should have, it'd be nice to have more than a 5-4 vote, and it would be nice to have it pass. First of all, reverse order. Nice to have it pass, nice to have it more than a 5-4 vote in terms of some sort of consensus, that we're a welcoming community and that we have welcoming city ordinance. It would be also nice to have the town of Normal do it, but from my perspective, and I've said this in public, there's no reason why Bloomington can't lead in social justice. It doesn't always have to be with Normal, but if we can do it with Normal, so much the better. And Normal has expressed some greater interest, let's put it that way. Sometimes I've assumed it's maybe more than it has been, but has expressed greater interest over the last several months than they had in the past. I think that's a reasonable, am I missing some? I'm looking at you, Steve, because you can sometimes maybe fill in better. I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but is there something, I'm just trying to account to say kind of what's happened mostly since December to the present.
All I know is they said that they would take it up, but we need to find out what the council's pleasure is in that, and we just wait to hear from you. I just want to hear what everyone has to say.
So there was no plan at this point in time to bring anything to council for a formal conversation. Is that accurate? And I'm not saying there should be or shouldn't be. I just want to make sure I understand the process.
There's not I think there's a plan for us to bring it back. I think we're thinking of bringing it back, but there's not a specific date.
Okay.
If I'm understanding your question
I will
correctly.
talk to you later then about why there's no certainty. Because what I'm trying to figure out is why, we need some finality on this conversation.
Yes.
At some point.
Yes.
I would like to have a plan to get that finality.
Right.
One way or the other. And maybe that's saying, thank you, not right now. Or preferably, I think, is having that public conversation, because I think that the public has really deserves to hear where we stand on this.
Right.
Whether we support it or not. So I would like for us to get there. And maybe it's after the budget, because things are going to be a little busy till then. But
well, and I think that was part of the thought, and I was mainly thinking out loud. I'm looking at Steve, so he can maybe check
I
mine.
just don't want all these individuals who would like to get our attention to have to fast every meeting. So perhaps we could get them some certainty on when we'll talk about it.
Right. Well, in the short run, I think after tonight we've made some huge progress in terms of the budget. So it may very well be that the budget is not as dominant as it was, because that has to be our highest priority, and that is making sure that we can keep the doors open, right? And so I think we might very well, in circling back, maybe Steve and I can circle back with the council to see where we are on, and try to give some sort of date. One of the reasons why...
Excuse me, I'm sorry to interrupt, but point of order here. I'm unclear how long the conversation between Alderman Burgess and the mayor will go on. This seems to be a bit of an abuse of the process. Mayor, I believe you already had your comments section. Alderman Burgess, you've made some comments, and now it's time to move forward.
Right.
I don't find this
to clarify, these are
or helpful.
It's unclear. We don't have Jeff here,
but on our agenda at this juncture.
Ultimately,
you have spoken for many minutes, Mayor. I'm saying a few comments for a few seconds, and so this is my perspective. I don't know how the other aldermen feel, but I think it's time to move on.
Well, I was asked. First of all, I was asked a specific question, and second of all, it is in the ordinance in the state of Illinois that as I understand it, and Jeff Juergens can clarify, that is the decision of the mayor. We have Robert's Rules of Order as a backup, as a micro level, but that's not. Robert's rules are a backup. But I was asked a specific question, and I was attempting to give an answer to that specific question.
Thank you, Mayor. I think we've heard your answer, and we understand you have an agenda, and you actually have a position in this matter that may differ from others, and that's what democracy is about, and kind of taking a strong-arm approach here to take over the comments at the end of the meeting. I don't think really is in that spirit, so I'd ask you to conclude and let the meeting move forward so that others can also speak to the other issues that are important to them as well. Thank you.
Sure. No, I appreciate that. I apologize if there was anything that I said that was strong-armed. It was certainly not meant to be that way. I certainly didn't think that I was making anything. I don't think I made any statements that was in favor of a welcoming city ordinance or opposed to it. I thought I was outlining what we did and when we did it. And what happened and what. Now, it may be, again, since December. I could certainly go on a lot longer about the benefits of a welcoming city ordinance. I was deliberately trying to avoid that. But I was responding to a specific question, and how long someone has to speak is actually up to the presiding officer according to Illinois law.
And I think you're being abusive at this juncture in order to put forward a platform that you personally embrace and which the council has weighed in and frankly has I think, some appetite to take a look at some issues, but certainly this isn't the manner in which to do it. And that's my opinion. I believe several other council would support that. I'm not sure at this juncture if there's an ability to make a motion to move forward or and get a vote on that, or if you're ready to voluntarily give up the floor, Mayor. Thank you.
Okay. All I could say is I'm sorry that you feel that way. I was trying as much as possible to avoid making statements that specifically talked about the merits of a welcoming city. But so anyway, did I answer your question, Alderwoman?
Thank you. And I did have a second question. So back at our February 28th meeting, we pulled some meeting minutes from our consent agenda for revision. They were from our February 12th meeting. Those have not yet come back for consideration. And I was wondering if we had a plan to do that so that we can get those approved in a timely manner. I'm kind of looking at Alderman Bray since it was her original motion. I don't know what the plan was to get those back, but I just wanted to know if we, in
terms of changing the minutes, I thought we were. This is just my thought. I thought we were, if we had changes, we would give them.
I thought we got them. Did we not get them?
Cherry, maybe you can help answer this question for us. Yeah.
Okay, so I sent the email with the link to everyone and asked that everyone respond and send me, according to your motion, what you wanted to see in the minutes or what your take was. And I received 2 responses by email. One was by Alderman Black, the other by Alderman Painter. So those are the only 2. And then I have received like a verbal comment from, let's see, Karen Memboka, maybe.
So let me ask you this. Are you prepared to bring us something back to consider for those minutes?
I'm working on them. It is a process because the actual verbatim set of minutes are between 51 and 57 pages long. And that conversation at the end probably range anywhere from 15 to 20 pages of having to go through and scale down just to be able to bring back that portion of the minutes that is being referenced.
Well, could I make a comment, though, maybe perhaps to not add more than is necessary to Cherry's workload? I mean, my understanding from that motion and that process was we would send in suggestions. Those could be incorporated and then voted on. I would hate to see you do more than is required by the motion that we had. So unless others remember it differently, I would suggest just go with the specific comments you've received and bring those back, and hopefully those are sufficient to meet the motion.
Okay. So,
since it was my motion, I'll speak to that. I think, Cherry, give us a time frame in which you'd like to hear back, and we can do that and get that together. I think that there was some very sensitive comments made, and I think folks are taking an opportunity to step away and gather the important information that need to appear in the minutes. And as we've moved forward into our budget time, I think we were seeking to find commonality and not division. And so I think that the pause that we've had here has been beneficial for us. And I would just encourage us to move forward in a way for commonality instead of division, and the techniques and the tactics within the meeting to hijack the meeting and take it places to put forward personal agendas really needs to be, I guess, sunsetted. I would recommend that. So thank you.
Okay.
Yeah. Alderwoman Bray, one of the suggestions that came forward was to more or less include everything that was said. And so if I include everything that was said in the last 20 minutes thereof of the meeting, then we're looking at, like I said, about 20 pages of having to go through and polish those minutes. And it's not a simple task.
I don't think that's what Alderwoman Bray is asking for. I think she's just asking for that one portion of it, and we could extract that and then bring it back to her and decide what she wanted to do with it. And if she wanted to make a motion that that was included in the minutes, then we could do that.
Well, actually, my motion was just give folks an opportunity to review their notes and then get back to you on what they would like to include. And again, I think that this pause time that we've had could serve us well so that we can consensus around important work that's before us and go back and take a look at our notes at some time in the future and update those minutes. I don't see a sense of exigency to move forward in that manner, Alderman Burgess, and it was my motion, and that's how I'd like to proceed. Thank you.
So, Chair, yeah.
So then what
So
I'll do
essentially,
is
I think, as Alderwoman Schmidt had kind of said, we need to be...
Nagged.
Okay, I thought it was nudged, okay.
Nudged, nagged, whatever.
So
Well, I'll resend the email back out to everyone.
resend the email back out.
With
and
the
then-
deadline, please.
With the deadline,
Deadlines
yeah.
are our
And
friend.
then we can move ahead, with that. Okay, Alderwoman Schmidt and then Black.
So given the lateness of the hour and the fact that we've been here getting on to 5 hours now, I think, Mboka said this is democracy in action, and I think democracy is messy. And it seems to me over the course of more than a year now that I have consistently seen this community put their hands in the air and say that we want to embrace the values that we share as a community, to welcome one another and care for one another. And I saw that in action at the BCPA when we had a convocation, for lack of a better word. I think it was back in January, February 2017, and it was standing room only. And I always think about that meeting as a group of people in this community who wanted to, quote unquote, be the change they want to see in the world. It was a very moving event. I just checked over the weekend, thinking about all the signs we see in our community that say, what does it say? Wherever you're from, we're glad you're here. I'm sorry, I'm tired. And we gave away over 1,200 of those in something like 3 weeks. I think people, and we heard this evening as well, that people want a role to play. And I really appreciated Mboka framing this up as it is more than just a binary, you're for the ordinance or you're against the ordinance. I think there's a lot of people in this community who want to be part of this conversation and help shape this section, this value in our community. And so I'd like to propose that on either committee of the whole or at a work session that maybe we begin to frame that up a little bit and think about how we might invite maybe our Human Relations Commission in, maybe our Public Safety and Community Relations Board, members of our faith community. Mayor, you mentioned Dayton, that's the Welcoming America program.
America, right,
yeah.
excuse me, sorry.
And I think that there's, I'm not sure that that's the panacea, but I think that there's a lot of parts of that are advantageous, that might give us some guidance. So I don't think we're going to hash this out tonight, but I think that I've consistently heard from my council colleagues as well as our community that we need a more engaged conversation. And I think some of the faltering and the halting that the community has seen by this council is this council saying this is not a kind of one and done sort of deal where you pass an ordinance and then it's over with. It's a far deeper and richer conversation. And I think it deserves that conversation. So I'd like to suggest that in one way or another we put that on an agenda for us to flesh out when maybe we're a little bit more fresh than we are right now.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Alderman Black.
Thank you. And given that we're coming up on hour number 5 here, I'll be as brief as possible. So as we've talked about the Welcoming Cities component, this is just another example of how the federal government has no leadership in this whatsoever, and they've kicked a problem down to the states, and the state has thrown together the Trust Act, and it's been kicked down to the cities, and it comes to us to fill the potholes, plow the streets, to fix these problems. And I'm just incredibly disappointed in the way that the elected officials at the federal level have not been able to address some of these questions. I don't think anybody up here ran for city council to create immigration policy. I know that I didn't. I am not qualified to comment on immigration policy. But ultimately, we have a sizable portion of our community asking us a question, and they've gone to some great lengths to get our attention on that matter. And I think we need to have some sort of an answer, and if that answer is no answer, that's an answer. And I guess I would, I just think back to my time on council here, and how when I've seen some of these big policy pieces and these big cultural milestones and touchstones get built, they're best when we all get to weigh in and provide our perspective. We may not vote on it and support it in the end, but as long as everybody's perspective is heard, we go from there. And you know, the last meeting that we had this kind of conversation, I know Alderman Sage was making some remarks about Karen, and you know, I didn't want to pile on too, but you've been a mentor for me, and I've always appreciated how you have been able to craft policy with thoughtful, deliberative, engaged, getting large groups of people together to weigh in, and Maboka the same way. You know, when you and I went to an NLC together, you know, I learned to be more calm and reserved and not fly off the handle as much. And you know, better than I was. You weren't on back then. It's more all over the place. And kind of the division I'm hearing is when I see this council not showing unity on some of these things, it means that the community is not unified on these things, and there's divisions in our community that we need to somehow build a consensus around. And I'm hearing, I've been disappointed and dismayed in the blowback that I've gotten from people who have been vitriolic in their hatred towards people that are different than themselves, and that needs to be corrected. And I'm also concerned about some of the things that people believe this ordinance is going to do, even though it would not do that, and then we're disappointing people on that front. So when I hear this kind of division on the council and I hear division in the community, that means it's time for a community conversation. And so I would advocate for the next available committee of the whole that we talk about these things. We get the feedback from the staff. I know there's been a revised ordinance that's come through, and to staff's credit, that they're not providing feedback because at this point in time, the majority of the council does not want that to happen, and that's fine. But this can't linger on for forever. And, you know, I just keep getting more and more troubled by the lack of policy that is coming out of our elected officials at the federal level. This is not something that we can tweet out and fix. These are things that we have to figure out and elect those folks who can figure that out. And we'll go through another election cycle, and 98% of Congress will be reelected. We'll go through this state elections, and 99% of everybody's going to be reelected. And so where are we? So I guess it's a long-winded way of saying that I think I would continue to advocate for us having a public meeting where we talk about this issue again, and we hear from my colleagues, and I'd love to get the feedback from the Community Review Board, the Human Relations Commissions. What questions do they have? Because when these questions and these conversations are happening in all these different pockets of our community, we come up with better public policy. And I think if we create a timeline, the folks who are advocating very strongly for this process to be expedited, we can give them a line of sight. And we can tweak and adjust that here and there, but it's going to happen. We're going to get there. And then we can start to get people on board who are still skeptical, and we can answer the questions and be fact-based and make it happen. And I'm hopeful moving forward on this whole topic, and I appreciate everybody's feedback, and I think the more people will get engaged. I know that some folks had mentioned to me there's even some folks researching how to get this question on a ballot. I'm not waiting for that. I think we should still get these questions answered and take it from there.
Okay. Is there a motion to, anybody else, a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Moved by Alderwoman Hellman. Is there a second? Second. I was going to say, I didn't think that would be hard. Second by Alderman Matthew. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Nay.
Okay. Then you stay. Sherry.